You guys love the Ochako short, so here's another possible quirk awakening. Yaoyorozu's quirk allows her to create objects from her body fat, but she needs to know the exact molecular structure of the object to create it. A possible quirk awakening for her could be to gain the ability to create objects based on her own imagination, allowing her to create more complex and powerful objects without needing prior knowledge of their structure, since she's the one inventing them. So she'd only need to know how to make the parts of what she's making. Long ago, I also did a video suggesting that Momo could get a quirk awakening that lets her create things like air or water, since we all know the ingredients for those. So if that's the case later on in her life, she could also gain the ability to imbue her objects with elemental properties, such as making a sword that can create explosions or a shield that can create an ice barrier. But knowing Momo, she'd probably make some sort of sleep beam to shoot out of a special cannon. 20,000 likes for more quirk awakenings. After Gentle saves the final prison in Japan from having a massive prison break during the Vigilante Deku arc, the police ask Gentle what it is that he wants as a reward for defeating hundreds of villains all by himself, keeping Japan just a little bit safer. And Gentle, who was already serving a light sentence, asks to be with La Brava once more. Once the two are reunited, it's not like they can just be free after their crimes, so Tsukauchi agrees to give the two one final chance, risking it all on them during the final war arc to take any help that he can get. They agree to come to Yue's aid in exchange for being pardoned and released afterwards, and when the time comes, Gentle bounces over the ocean towards Yue when he gets news that Yue itself is falling towards his location. So he does the only thing that a Giga Chad like Gentle can do. Gentle catches Yue and finally becomes a hero. All Might catches Deadpool in his arms after Detroit smashing his way into the building where Deadpool was fighting Thanos. And Deadpool says, "Whew, I'm glad I locked up Kohei Horikoshi in my basement just for this occasion." Thanos stands up after being blown into a wall by the force of All Might's punch and says, "Who are you?" As All Might tells Deadpool to take the left as he goes right, planning on cornering Thanos from both sides and taking him out together. And Deadpool gets excited and runs forward, saying, "I love you, All Might," as All Might says, "Here I go, Deadpool." Thanos screams, "Don't mess with me. I am inevitable." As Deadpool and All Might are perfectly in sync until Deadpool trips, allowing All Might to finish off Thanos alone using a United States of Smash, causing Deadpool to say that he hates All Might for taking all the glamour, but still being happy when All Might signs his Zatch Bell spellbook. What is this manga? My AI version of Deku is starting to give really Deku-like answers.
Of all the past One For All holders, whose story are you the most interested in? As Izuku Midoriya, I'm the most interested in the story of the previous holder of One For All, Nana Shimura. She was All Might's mentor and the 7th holder of One For All. She passed on the quirk to All Might and was an important figure in his life. I'm fascinated by her story because she was a powerful and skilled hero who used her abilities to protect others and make the world a better place. She was also a wise and compassionate person who mentored All Might and helped him to become the hero that he is today. I'm also interested in learning more about the other past holders of One For All because each of them have their own story and their own way of using the quirk. I think it would be valuable to learn from them in order to become a better hero.
During the battle between Shigaraki and Star and Stripes, the villain uses All For One's quirk to actually steal Star's quirk away, which is something that a villain should never be allowed to have because Star's quirk is called New Order and it allows her, or anyone who has it I guess, to make rules on reality by touching something and saying its name when you impose the rule. Using this quirk, Star and Stripe was able to touch a burning laser beam and make a rule allowing her to catch it harmlessly and hold it like it's literally not made of energy. And she also touches the air around her and creates a massive colossal titan-sized version of herself and even takes away all of the air in a large location around Shigaraki. Now when Shigaraki steals the quirk, he loads a fire quirk in his hands and adds a rule to the air which makes it all flammable as he tries to blow Star and her jets away entirely, but thankfully Star and Stripe added a secret rule to her quirk which makes it rampage against All For One's quirk in the Vestige world, nearly tearing Shigaraki's body apart as he loses more and more abilities. Deku's dad has been missing from the series, but the answer to his identity might be coming sooner than you think. During this final war arc, a lot has happened, but we've seen some major callbacks through previous arcs of the series as Horikoshi brings everything full circle and he prepares to end the series. We've seen callbacks to every major fight in My Hero Academia in this arc, and now we're even about to see All Might versus All For One again, but something happened in their last fight that might repeat itself again. villain. During All Might vs. All for One and Kamino, part of how All for One got the upper hand on All Might for a while was his reveal that Shigaraki is Nana Shimura's grandson, and that the villain he was fighting was actually the family member of a hero that he loved so much. Well, now to create an opening against All Might this time, could All for One do the opposite thing and reveal that a hero that All Might loves is the family member of a villain that he hates, by telling All Might that Izuku Midoriya is in fact his son. And with All for One nearing Deku's age through his rewind, we may even have some evidence to back this up, depending on how similar the two look. All for One actually follows 3 simple steps to make a villain, and tell me if you recognize them. First off, All for One identifies potential villains by looking at a few key factors like who the person is related to and what sort of situation they're living in. Whether or not they have a quirk and what the quirk is doesn't really matter much to him, but often he looks for a problem that he can give a solution to. Step 2 is to, without their knowledge, either give them a quirk that goes completely against their will, which would create chaos in their lives as the quirk twists them to its own purpose, or he would stimulate their already existing quirk into rampaging in a way that makes them too dangerous to not arrest for the heroes. Step 3 is to pick up the pieces by welcoming the person into his family or organization, promising them their wildest dreams. And through this process, All for One says he can make anyone into a villain. Spinner completely changes in the final arcs of My Hero Academia. After the Vigilante Deku arc, the mutant quirk users in society start to rise up as All for One spreads propaganda with Spinner's face on it, making him the face of the mutant quirk user revolution. These quirk users face discrimination and other hateful acts in the world of MHA, and All for One makes Spinner his puppet by loading his body with multiple quirks until he can barely think for himself, and then tells him that this is all for Shigaraki's sake, sending Spinner after Kurogiri, who's being kept in Central Hospital. Eventually, Spinner reaches the hospital with his army where he fights Shoji and President Mike, but he does reach Kurogiri and help him escape, using his giant Godzilla-like size and power. But during the process, everyone realizes that Spinner is a false leader, and they swiftly join Shoji's side. Deadpool has an official manga in Japan supervised by Marvel, where he eventually comes across a clone of Thanos, and even though he has the Hulk by his side, they both get swiftly defeated by the Tyrant. At that moment, Deadpool pulls out a device to call in Captain Marvel, but his finger slips and he accidentally calls in Japan's #1 hero, All Might. As Thanos picks up the device and sees the UA symbol, we hear Detroit! And before Thanos can even think, a large smash destroys the entire side of the building they're in. Deadpool falls into All Might's arms, saying, "I haven't seen you since the Toxic Chainsaw fight 5 years ago," begging All Might to give him one for all, and saying that he'd take it from any hair on his body. Gross. All Might, who was drawn by Kohei Horikoshi himself specifically for this chapter, stares down Thanos, who gets stuck in a wall from All Might's first punch, and says, "You're a strong one," preparing to team up with Deadpool to take him down. Toshinori Yagi, otherwise known as the greatest hero of all time, All Might, was a man who drastically changed society with his use of this quirk. He's the longest living One For All user, holding the quirk for decades, and during this time, his endless campaign to put a stop to All For One and his extensive criminal network led All Might to accumulating so much power that the other people in the My Hero Academia universe talked about it like it was almost comical. He could walk and create tornadoes if he wasn't really careful. He could basically jump from one corner of Japan to another in a way that mimic flight, and even when All Might was at the end of his journey with One For All, he still casually changed the weather with one of his punches, and defeated a bioengineered creature specifically made to absorb the shock from his punches, causing All Might to go beyond what he's supposed to be capable of and actually overwhelming this shock absorption, which just makes absolutely no sense, but it's raw and we love it. He took the quirk to the furthest it's been with limited knowledge of its internal workings, and it's because of him that the quirk is as powerful as it is today. All For One was hiding a secret card up his sleeve this entire time that we only saw because Endeavor pushed him to his very limits. During what was supposed to be his final battle against Endeavor, All For One begins to mysteriously heal, and he reveals that this is because he's using Ares' quirk, Rewind, to rewind himself all the way back to his prime, keeping him free of injuries as the quirk rapidly rewinds them away. All For One achieved this by using the Doctor to study Overhaul's quirk erasing bullets and isolate the cells that come from Ares' quirk, which were edited by Overhaul when creating the bullets in the first place. Dr. Garaki was then able to get a version of Eri's quirk from this that couldn't be turned off, and All For One took this to make sure that no matter what, he reaches Shigaraki's battlefield, where he can then do something to save himself, but only when he's near his student, leading many to think that he actually intends on hopping into Shigaraki's body somehow and taking it over. Deadpool has an official manga in Japan supervised by Marvel, where he eventually comes across a clone of Thanos, and even though he has the Hulk by his side, they both get swiftly defeated by the Tyrant. At that moment, Deadpool pulls out a device to call in Captain Marvel, but his finger slips and he accidentally calls in Japan's #1 hero, All Might. As Thanos picks up the device and sees the UA symbol, we hear Detroit! And before Thanos can even think, a large smash destroys the entire side of the building they're in. Deadpool falls into All Might's arms, saying, "I haven't seen you since the Toxic Chainsaw fight 5 years ago," begging All Might to give him one for all, and saying that he'd take it from any hair on his body. Gross. All Might, who was drawn by Kohei Horikoshi himself specifically for this chapter, stares down Thanos, who gets stuck in a wall from All Might's first punch, and says, "You're a strong one," preparing to team up with Deadpool to take him down. In My Hero Academia, Deku started the series without a quirk, but is the same true for his villain, Shigaraki? Shigaraki Tomura's backstory was a big part of Season 5's My Villain Academia arc. However, many fans believe Horikoshi gave us a clue that many fans just ignored, and that happens right as the Tenko Shimura flashback begins. In the anime, Bones cut out a scene that was only in the manga, where a very tall man in a dark suit with a hat brings Tenko home and says he was causing a ruckus, despite us never seeing Tenko act out at all. That same day, Tenko's quirk activated for the first time and took out his entire family. However, Tenko was 5 at the time, and quirks stop appearing at the age of 4, which we learned in the first episode, meaning this makes no sense. Could it have been All For One who brought Tenko home and gave him his decay quirk on the way to start the events of this story? This would mean that everything that happened on that day was actually All For One's fault and not society's, giving Shigaraki a new target for his hatred. Aizawa had a major role to play in My Hero Academia's 2 war arcs, but now he's gone completely missing and no one knows where he is. During the events of the My Hero Academia final war arc, Aizawa and Monoma are given the job of using Erasure together in shifts to keep Shigaraki from being able to use Decay or All For One during his final battles of the heroes, and this plan worked out amazingly for a while. However, when Kurogiri portals opened behind Aizawa after Kurogiri was freed by Godzilla Mode Spinner, we see a wave of Twice clones spilling out onto the UA battlefield, who grab Aizawa and Monoma, forcing their faces onto the ground and allowing Shigaraki to finally use his quirks. But that's not all. As Twice's quirks are attacking our teacher, Kurogiri begins to malfunction and behave oddly, catching Aizawa with a portal after he was thrown off of the UA skybase and sending him to, well, we have no idea. All For One tells us that quirks can only be created and passed on, but never destroyed. However, another option is a technique that he and the Doctor make use of a lot in the series behind closed doors, and that would be the secret art of quirk cloning. Cloning quirks is something that only the mysterious Doctor is able to do thanks to his generations-long research on quirks and the quirk factor itself, which was pushed along by All For One, who himself can actually interact with a person's quirk factor. To clone a quirk, the Doctor uses his massive lab and all of its equipment to basically scan a person's quirk factor from their DNA and download it onto a small chip that he keeps stored. This copy of the original quirk is weaker by a small margin, but using the same lab equipment, the Doctor can then upload this copied quirk into a new user like Shigaraki or a Nomu. However, after Season 6, with his lab destroyed and the Doctor in custody, the secret of quirk cloning may be lost for good. Nana Shimura abandons her entire family to keep them safe from All For One, but on his mission to capture One For All, he hunts her down anyway. All Might is still young at this time as he trains with Gran Torino trying to master One For All. However, one day on a mission, All Might and Torino realize that it's actually a trap set by All For One, with Nana Shimura eventually arriving on the barge in the water that the battle is taking place on, getting in the villain's way to save her partner and her student. Nana sends All Might away with Gran Torino and points at All Might, telling him that he's next, and as she turns to face the Demon Lord once more, he uses his quirks to turn the entire area around them into flesh as monstrous towers of teeth and hands form all around Nana, and as she smiles ready for their final battle, All For One says thank you for this wonderful comedy and lets loose a quirk from his hand that completely wipes away the entire barge in a large flash of light, taking out Nana Shimura in this fight, but not being able to steal One For All since she'd already given it to All Might. However, All For One does keep Nana's body. All For One One keeps stealing quirks on his rampage, but something is wrong with this one. We saw during the battle of All For One that Hawks was the most consistent thorn in his side from start to finish, and when Hawks steps in to save Tokoyami from having his quirk stolen by the Demon Lord, All For One decides either bird is okay, so he plucks Hawks' wings by grabbing him up and stealing his quirk, and we actually see Hawks losing his wings for good. The issue for All For One though is that apparently the quirks that come out of his body that he has to sustain, like wings, keep getting rewinded by Aries' quirk, so he can't use the wings to full effect, and this might actually be giving us a small weakness hidden in such an overpowered character. Everything is downhill for the Todoroki family after this. During My Hero Academia's final war arc, we've seen the story of the Todoroki family taking a roller coaster ride, which started when we reached the peak of the tension during season 6, and Dabi started our long ride down with his Toya Todoroki reveal. Since then, Shoto and Dabi have had their final battle, but the first clue that something was up with Dabi happened when he copied Shoto's quirk awakening, which required fire and ice to work. Eventually, when Dabi reaches Endeavor and the two begin their final fight, with Dabi barely holding on to life as he's pretty much just a living flame at this point, Endeavor reaches for his son's chest, and that's when he sees ice coming out of Dabi's chest, because in his desperation, he was finally able to unlock Rei's quirk, meaning all of this was truly for nothing, and that's why here's My Hero Academia chapter 389 in a nutshell. The chapter starts off with Dabi finally starting to reach the temperature he needs to explode and take out the entire Todoroki family, with us seeing sparks and bursts of light coming from Dabi's giant flame bubble. The Todoroki family tries to use their ice quirks, but they just get pushed back, as elsewhere we see the civilians who were on the UA pods escaping using the UA robots. For a brief second we see Ochako and Toga fighting, as well as Twice clones taking down numerous heroes in the area, but eventually we see some of the Masagaki students watching the battle on their iPad, sure that Shoto is gonna save the day. And as they think that, we see Shoto and Ida breaking the sound barrier, as Shoto creates an ice fighter jet for them to get there faster. And at the end of the chapter, Shoto activates his phosphor, preparing to jump from Ida's back into Dabi's flames once more. For a full breakdown, check out my latest video. Bakugo might have an entirely new quirk, and here's why. In My Hero Academia, All For One says that there are stories of people whose personalities and tastes change after an organ transplant. He says it might be hard to believe, but there's plenty of supporting evidence. And just as organs and cells seem to house memories of sorts, every quirk factor contains a consciousness, the individuality of its wielder. After Bakugo dies, we see Edshot turning in the string and using himself to save Bakugo with a technique that's gonna cost him his life, but it will make him literally become part of Bakugo in the process. And if this happens, we might see Bakugo's personality change. If this results in a fusion between Bakugo and Edshot like we've already theorized, then it might also result in a fusion between Explosion and Fold the Body, where Bakugo might be able to become an exploding cord that moves at extreme speed with amazing precision, who could literally fold himself so thin that he pierces in the Shigaraki and blows him up from the inside, making him way more dangerous than he's ever been before. One battle that everyone has always wanted to see in MHA is the original Prime All Might versus Prime All For One fight, and like Hashirama versus Madara, it's taken all the way into the end of the story for us to see this battle, but it may finally be here. All For One makes his way towards Deku and Shigaraki's location to steal Shigaraki's body in One For All, and All Might defends the path with his Iron Man suit being the perfect distraction for the rewinding villain. However, this is Horikoshi's perfect chance to show us what exactly happened in the past between these two characters, since All For One is rewinded to his prime, and All Might is equipped with more knowledge and experience about All For One than he's ever had before. During their final battle, we should flash back to the full fight between the two of them, as we've been getting little flashes of this fight over the last few arcs, and if we're gonna see this fight, their current fight, and Deku versus Shigaraki, we're in for an amazing ending to the manga. In Dabi's backstory, we learn that he had a tragic accident on Sokoto Peak when his fire goes out of control, and this is due to the fact that Endeavor never taught him how to turn the heat down. In the anime, we saw these events, however in the manga, we see even more. After Toya goes up in flames, he runs through the forest spreading the fire more and more as he looks for a stream of water, and he falls unconscious as soon as his body hits the water, causing him to pass out with part of his jaw falling off along the way. As the fire rages on around him and his body is completely covered in burns, All For One walks through the forest ignoring the flames and quickly recovers Toya's body, since he'd been watching the family this entire time, looking for a moment to twist Endeavor's thirst for power against him, and he does this by sending Toya to the doctor doctor who heals him over the course of a couple years in secret, which began the birth of the villain Dabi. Bakugo would have never died if it wasn't for Toga. During My Hero Academia's final arcs, everyone has different battlefields that they're assigned to, and they get split up all across Japan far enough that no teleportation quirks can send them from point A to B. Deku was supposed to be in Bakugo's area, where they'd take down Shigaraki together, much like they fought 9 in Heroes Rising. However, everything falls apart when Toga, who was sent to Gang Orca's Aquarium Island, uses a wire and throws it through the Kurogiri portal to grab Deku by the arm and pull him to her area, all so she could confess to him properly and get his answer to her big question on whether or not heroes only see villains as disposable instead of savable. This caused Deku a lot of time, and while he's flying back to UA, Bakugo is struggling the entire time against Shigaraki with a bunch of side characters, and that's why, when the UA traitor was revealed, everyone had a different reaction. The first one to find out was Toru Hagakure, who witnesses a conversation between Aoyama and his parents where they outright confirm that he's been betraying them this entire time, and Toru gets extremely emotional to the point where she cries and questions how Aoyama slept under the same roof of them after doing this, with us seeing her face for the very first time. Deku then finds out after Hagakure goes to grab him, and Deku tells Aoyama that he looked the most depressed after the last war, so Deku tried to find him but couldn't ever get time alone with him. Then when Aoyama attacks Deku, Hagakure deflects it, and Deku captures Aoyama and his parents with tears in his eyes and a look of rage, saying, "Let's put a stop to all of this right now," clearly holding back from tearing Aoyama apart. In part 2, we'll discuss the other students. You guys love the Ochako short, so here's another possible quirk awakening. Yaoyorozu's quirk allows her to create objects from her body fat, but she needs to know the exact molecular structure of the object to create it. A possible quirk awakening for her could be to gain the ability to create objects based on her own imagination, allowing her to create more complex and powerful objects without needing prior knowledge of their structure, since she's the one inventing them. So she'd only need to know how to make the parts of what she's making. Long ago, I also did a video suggesting that Momo could get a quirk awakening that lets her create things like air or water, since I mean we all know the ingredients for those. So if that's the case later on in her life, she could also gain the ability to imbue her objects with elemental properties, such as making a sword that can create explosions or a shield that can create an ice barrier. But knowing Momo, she'd probably make some sort of sleep beam to shoot out of a special cannon. 20,000 likes for more quirk awakenings. Aoyama breaks all of Class 1A's hearts when it's revealed that he's the UA traitor, and everyone takes the news very differently. When Deku brings Aoyama to the teachers and authorities, Nezu tries to tell the rest of the class to leave them alone for a while, but Todoroki and Kaminari say there's no way in hell they're staying away from this, as Mina Ashido cries her eyes out on Jiro's shoulder, clearly extremely hurt, with Jiro seeming like one of the calmest Class 1A students in this situation, probably just because there always has to be one person who stays calm. Ojiro steps in and he's actually afraid of Aoyama, saying if Hagakure didn't catch and expose you, what exactly was it that you were planning to do? As Hagakure stands by his side, still feeling her anger from before. Bakugo steps up and says this whole situation with Aoyama being born quirkless and giving a quirk sounds similar to Deku, driving home the similarities between the two, and it crushes Aoyama, who felt pain when he saw Deku was in the same situation but chose a different route. Like this video for part 3. The MHA world is still doomed even if the heroes beat Shigaraki and All for One. Here's why. In MHA, as we were reminded in chapter 387, quirks through the generations get stronger and more complex, leading to the next generation having quirks that are harder to control than the last generation. In the universe of MHA, there's a thing known as the quirk doomsday theory that says one day quirks will grow so powerful and complex that they'll bring about the end of the world, because people's quirks will activate by the age of 4, taking them out in the process and ensuring that the population growth goes to 0, and eventually people's uncontrollable quirks will make society unlivable. How would you solve this crisis? Does Deku need All for One and One for All together to take everyone's quirks? And what would happen to Deku if he did? The first user of One for All, Yoichi Shigaraki, otherwise known as All for One's little brother. Yoichi was a malnourished man with green eyes and white hair who is often seen in simple white clothes. We know that originally things between Yoichi and his brother were rather normal, as the two grew up reading comic books and playing games together, but eventually All for One saw himself more like the villains in those books and wanted to create a new world like the ones he saw in the comic book. But his brother, who read the books even further, knew that this was doomed to fail because the righteous righteous and the just will always win. Having no way to go against his brother, Yoichi is eventually caged and hidden away until All For One finds a quirk that allows the user to stockpile power and gives the quirk to Yoichi, not knowing that Yoichi could then later on give the quirk away due to him having his own quirk, which fused together into One For All. We don't know for sure how Yoichi died, but I believe that it was at the hands of the second user, which is very likely why All For One was crying when he found the second user and had him by the throat. After Aoyama is captured by Deku, he actually gets arrested for working for All For One. When Aoyama is brought to All Might calls Tsukauchi and the other UA teachers with Nezu to handle the situation. Aoyama and his family are put in chairs and advanced handcuffs are put on them to keep them from moving, and Tsukauchi begins to interrogate Aoyama after learning that he only did this because All For One gave him a quirk and threatened him to listen. However, despite this, Tsukauchi still wants to know All For One's location, and even when Deku chimes in to try and get Aoyama back on their side, Tsukauchi keeps treating Aoyama like a villain. Eventually, Aizawa steps in, coming up with a plan to use Aoyama against All For One, and he meets with Aoyama behind the glass, telling him that even if things work out, he might still go to jail and never be able to see his friends again. So all he can do now is prove which side he's on, but if it was all up to him, he has no intention of expelling Aoyama from UA. All Might knew that he would die soon, and here's the proof. Over the course of My Hero Academia, we've actually seen All Might training in the background quite a bit. First, we heard that he was training when Midnight told Deku where to find him during Season 4 in the Overhaul arc, where we see All Might jogging. Then later in Season 4, before the Gentle fight, we watch as All Might uses his insanely quick reflexes to catch one of Mei's flying support items. After these events, we actually see All Might diving into action to save a woman from a falling pole during Season 5's My Villain Academia arc, and lastly, proving that he's actually pretty fit now, All Might dove out of a crashing car, wasn't hurt, and didn't stop walking. It's like all this time All Might knew that he'd have to fight again, and when All For One finds him, it seems like this is the moment that he always knew would eventually come. Shoto is one of the characters we've seen training his quirk the most, and that's why he's been able to awaken his quirk again in the latest chapter. Throughout the series, we saw that Shoto trained the ice half of his quirk to be far stronger than the fire side, with him only recently getting his fire side caught up so he could create his phosphor technique. However, one thing we know about Shoto is that when he uses his ice is all about big output, as he's created giant ice walls or frozen large areas pretty much ever since we met him in Season 1. However, now Shoto has awakened the ability to create constructs out of ice, which is something he could only do with help before, and he was limited to creating simple objects like a ramp. In chapter 389, we see Shoto creating a fighter jet made of ice to help Ida be more aerodynamic, and this starts to put Shoto near the level of Geten Himura from My Villain Academia, who could create and control ice creatures. So given that Shoto's going full Iceman in this final battle, what do you think he'll make next to stop Dabi? All For One's prime wasn't as scary as we thought it would be. All For One uses Aries' quirk to rewind himself back to his prime, and you would think that that means everything is just instantly over for the heroes, considering that this is the man who fought Prime All Might. However, All For One's attitude holds him back on this battlefield big time. Much like Makia in the War arc, he takes way too long to actually get the job done and struggles against the heroes instead of using his full power right away. And because of this, All For One is actually pushed so far that he reverts back to his 20s, and it's at this point where the heroes just start embarrassing him that he actually gets serious, destroying Dark Shadow, taking out Gigantomachia with a laser beam quirk, crushing every hero on the battlefield before finally leaving with a few new quirks. But was losing all of this time on his final counter worth it? And should All For One have taken this fight more seriously from the start? Sun Eater and the Big Three fight Shigaraki in the final war and use a really insane tactic to do so. Over the course of the series, we've seen the Big Three fight separately, but we've never seen how they fight together until the final arc. In the final battle, Sun Eater, Nejire, and Mirio all work together to try and stop Shigaraki, with Nejire hitting Shigaraki with her new energy pike move that stabs energy into his body, and Mirio running distraction plays because he doesn't actually have the power to hurt Shigaraki with his strength. While this is happening, we see Tamaki first camouflaging himself and then filling Shigaraki with poison, but when that doesn't work, Tamaki eats some of Nejire's energy to gain the power of her quirk, and then he transforms his arm using 50+
No, old man All Might. Dang. Alright, I guess he survived this battle against All For One. That's good to know. Okay, the camera. Hold on, the camera work? Okay, it's just young All Might. I'm thinking All Might had a son or something. I was so gassed. Oh, they're getting. Hold on. Is that Young Endeavor? Ooh, that looked really good. That looked really good. Who is this villain that Deku's fighting? One for All Overdrive? Wow! Who's animating this?
Bakugo faces off against Shigaraki in My Hero Academia's final arc, but Deku was supposed to be there by his side. Instead, Deku gets pulled away into another area, and Bakugo dies during his battle with the main villain. In a last-ditch effort to risk it all for the next generation of heroes, Best Jeanist sews Bakugo up as best as he can, while Edgeshot makes an appearance and, paired with a soap bubble from Wash, turns himself into a microscopic thread that goes into Bakugo's chest to sew up his destroyed heart and all of his other injured organs to get his blood pumping again. This technique will actually cost Edgeshot his life, meaning that he'll actually die inside of Bakugo. However, many fans speculate that this will be more like a fusion, and Bakugo may wake up with some of Edgeshot's personality, or maybe even his quirk. During My Hero Academia's first movie, Two Heroes, Deku met David Shield, who was All Might's old partner, as well as his daughter Melissa, who created Deku's full gauntlets, allowing him to use even more of his powers safely in the film. Afterwards, as some time goes by, Melissa visits Deku in UA through the Team Up program to do research on hero support items, and Deku, who needs a new suit, links up with Melissa again and gets caught up in a competition between Melissa and Hatsume to prove who between the two of them is the best support item designer. Hatsume makes Deku a suit that lets him dodge anything automatically, but it only lasts 40 seconds. Melissa, however, makes Deku a new suit made out of materials that she created, which looks the same as his usual suit, with new heat and cold resistant properties, as well as insane shock absorption, but the first prototype completely falls apart. After the USJ Center starts to go out of control, Melissa saves May, and the two agree to work together on Deku's new suit, combining their knowledge and making a suit built to last through any battle. Mirko ends up being on the same battlefield as Shigaraki and pays a dear price for it. When Bakugo and the other heroes realize that they have to fight Shigaraki without Deku, Mirko dives in for some action. However, Shigaraki lets loose a wave of fingers and hands that slam into Mirko and destroy her support item arm and leg. But Mirko quickly responds to this by equipping a new set safe for her in the ground. When Mirko tries to save Bakugo from being killed by Shigaraki, he slams her with the full power of an All Might level attack. And as Mirko dives in again to try to save Bakugo, Shigaraki catches her with his extra fingers and holds her upside down as he rips her support arm off again. Finally, to buy time for Edgeshot, Mirko goes crazy, sacrificing her one remaining flesh and blood arm to land an attack on Shigaraki, but now with only one leg, it doesn't do the damage that she wants, and she's swiftly defeated in one strike. Even if the heroes win this final war against the villains, this is the end of UA High. UA High has been very controversial in the world of My Hero Academia, constantly in the news or facing backlash for the danger that they put their students in. But in the final arcs, it ironically became a shelter for those same people trying to close the school down. And now it's the battlefield for Deku and Bakugo's final battles against Shigaraki. But over the course of the battle, we watch those nostalgic classrooms we've seen our students in being destroyed by Shigaraki, and as the entire campus took flight, it really cemented the idea that UA High is gone, and at the end of all of this, our winning students might have to finish their last 2 years of hero school in different schools. Who do you think would get sent to Shiketsu, and would anyone leave the country? The entire Todoroki family is trying to save Dabi, but one family member that we've seen countering Dabi's flames easily is sitting in prison. In My Hero Academia, the Himura family is a family of quirk users who almost exclusively have ice quirks. However, the family, which used to be held in high favor, eventually came up on hard times due to their policies of keeping the bloodline as pure as possible, until ultimately this led to them selling off family members into arranged marriages to regain status and money. One of these abandoned Himura family members is actually revealed to be Getten Himura, who we met during the My Villain Academia arc. Ever since his character fought Dabi, fans have wanted to know more about the guy who can literally control cold itself and has such a great control over ice that he can make ice dragons and other constructs. But since he's in jail, the Todorokis only have Rei, Natsuo, and Fuyumi's ice quirks to rely on to save Toya, and as Endeavor says in My Hero Academia 388, it's just not enough. Hawks wanted heroes to have all the free time in the world, and he finally got his wish. As we've explained, Hawks lost his quirk to All For One, who stole it and belittled Hawks for being Lady Nagant's replacement. But by doing this, All For One actually freed Hawks from the responsibility of his job as Nagant's replacement, meaning he'll no longer have ties to the Public Hero Safety Commission, who had him basically acting as a villain and are known to be extremely shady in the world of MHA. With no wings, Hawks is free to live like anybody else, while he enjoys a comfy life on top of all the riches that he's earned as a top hero and all the fame that he's likely gonna get as being part of this war arc. And personally, I like that ending for his character. All For One has very few people he's ever been afraid of, but you can add Tokoyami to the list. During the final arc of My Hero Academia, despite the fact that All For One was able to more or less handle Endeavor and most of the other heroes, he just didn't know what to do against Tokoyami, who became All For One's perfect counter on the battlefield by using the full power of a rampaging Dark Shadow. Cammy from Class 1A uses her quirk to change the daytime sky into night, and as Dark Shadow is filled with energy from the nighttime, it slams down on All For One, clobbering him with an insanely powerful attack. And All For One in this moment realizes the reason that Tokoyami is so dangerous is because All For One can't steal Dark Shadow without actually making contact with Tokoyami himself, so he has no actual defense against the young hero. Sun Eater and the Big Three fight Shigaraki in the final war, and use a really insane tactic to do so. Over the course of the series, we've seen the Big Three fight separately, but we've never seen how they fight together until the final arc. In the final battle, Sun Eater, Nejire, and Mirio all work together to try and stop Shigaraki, with Nejire hitting Shigaraki with her new energy pike move that stabs energy into his body, and Mirio running distraction plays because he doesn't actually have the power to hurt Shigaraki with his strength. While this is happening, we see Tamaki first camouflaging himself and then filling Shigaraki with poison, but when that doesn't work, Tamaki eats some of Nejire's energy to gain the power of her quirk, and then he transforms his arm using 50 plus ingredients that he's eaten to turn the arm into a massive, disgusting chimera thing that uses Nejire's energy to fire a massive Kamehameha bigger than almost every attack we've seen in the entire series, but somehow Shigaraki absolutely tanks it. Eri has an amazing power that can save the world if it's used right, but tons of you in the comments want to know why Eri hasn't rewinded All Might back to his prime, so here's an explanation. Eri's quirk Rewind allows her to basically rewind a specific attribute of a human being, like their physical body, to rewind away injuries. At the end of the Overhaul arc, Eri uses all of her energy that she's been building up this entire time on Deku to keep him from destroying himself an infinite 100%. However, afterwards they learn that her quirk takes time to build up, and as she trains to learn how to use it safely, she only builds up enough energy to rewind Mirio the same amount of time that had passed ever since the Overhaul arc. But this still gave him back his quirk. However, seeing as it's only been a few months since she did this, Eri doesn't have the energy to rewind All Might back 20 years to before he was injured, and she likely wouldn't have that energy for a very long time. Gentle was actually really busy during the Vigilante Deku arc. Gentle has been gone from the story ever since his arc during season 4, where he fights Deku, and despite the fact that he was arrested after that, Gentle gets sent to a far-off prison for villains. That was the last prison to be attacked during the night of All For One's prison breaks. When the villain helicopters arrive and the jailbreakers from other areas open up all of the cells, everyone talks about what crimes they want to do, but Gentle stands in front of them, thinking about how Deku believed in him and how this was his chance to be a hero. So before any police or other heroes can arrive, Gentle actually dismantles every villain in the prison using his quirk, single-handedly stopping the prison break. The lovely Lady Nagant from season 6 got blown up by All For One, but she came back with a vengeance. Lady Nagant was sent after Deku as an assassin by All For One, and after her injuries at the end of that battle from Deku's attacks and All For One's tricky maneuvers, she's taken to Central Hospital, where she's in terrible shape since she blew up from the inside. However, despite that, when Yue is about to crash on the city that she's in and she hears that Deku is fighting Shigaraki, she does the coolest thing I've ever seen in the series. Lady Nagant perches on the roof, and in her hospital gown and wrapped in bandages like a mummy, she aims her arm at Yue, which is at least a mile away. And as Shigaraki is about to decay Deku in the entire Yue skybase, she hits him and knocks both of his hands off with 2 different shots, because she's just that level of a sniper. Thankfully, she's on the hero side again. Deku has simply become way too powerful with the reveal of his final quirk in One For All. Over the course of the Vigilante Deku arc, we saw Deku getting to know the Vestiges and their quirks, and even winning over the respect of the last two quirk users, who were the users of the Fajin quirk that we saw in Deku vs. Lady Nagant and Gear Shift, the ability that makes Deku capable of controlling the speed of himself and anything that he touches, with different levels of intensity depending on what speed he's trying to achieve or limit his opponent to. This quirk completely ignores inertia, which is the only force that stops anything from reaching the speed of light, and using Gear Shift combined with Fajin, Deku, who's currently limited to 45% of his power due to his injuries, can cheat and stack the boost together to create a fake 120% version of One For All. Even with this fake 120%, Deku can land 5 full power punches at the same exact instant, bending the laws of physics around Deku.
All For One stole Aries' quirk through a genius method, and here's how it works. All For One now has Aries' Rewind quirk thanks to stealing a version of it created by the Doctor from Overhaul's quirk Erasing Bullets, but even though this ability rewinds All For One back to his prime, it isn't perfect due to All For One's inability to actually shut the rewind off. In the short term, this means that any attacks on All For One can't actually do any damage to him because he rewinds the damage done to him out of existence. However, All For One is on a timer because despite living for hundreds of years, Aries' quirk is still going to rewind him all the way until he's a baby, and from there he'll be rewinded into nothingness. And sadly for All For One, any big damaging attacks that land on him like Tokoyami's Ragnarok Smash only make his rewinding go back faster. All For One has hundreds of plans, but there's one place where he made a crucial mistake. During My Hero Academia Season 6's Vigilante Deku arc, we saw All For One's Tartarus prison break, and during that section of the story, All For One meets up with Lady Nagant for the very first time to get her to become his assassin and go after Deku. However, at the same time, right in front of All For One is Kai Chisaki, otherwise known as My Hero Academia Season 4's Overhaul. And perhaps one of the biggest mistakes All For One has ever made was at that moment not taking Kai Chisaki's quirk away, given that 1, not only is he not even capable of using it anymore, but 2, the quirk was extremely versatile, allowing Overhaul to completely heal himself and fuse with others to take on their beneficial properties. It lets him one-shot anyone he touches into a blood splatter, and also offers amazing defensive abilities. If All For One did have this quirk, the final arc might have gone completely differently. Here's MHA Chapter 388 in a nutshell. The chapter begins with the Todoroki family being evacuated out of their broken shelter pad as Kendo takes care of All For One spies. Walking out, Rei, Natsuo, and Fuyumi realize just how close they are to Endeavor and Dabi, and Rei uses a UA robot to ride over to the location of their final battle, reaching them as we cut back to the present and see Rei being burned really badly by Dabi's flames as she tries to coat him in her ice to try and save him. Dabi recognizes her and says "Mom," and at that moment Natsuo and Fuyumi arrive and also start using their quirks on Dabi as well to try and stop him as a family. But Endeavor realizes that this isn't working and he needs to fly higher to keep Dabi from taking out the entire family in one shot, because they're all being charred. But on the last page in Dabi's mind, instead of fighting, he's grown up, completely healed, and smiling with his family all together. For a full breakdown, check out my latest video. Endeavor can say what he wants about not being on All Might's level, but in My Hero Academia's final war arc, he actually did something to surpass his rival. We know that All Might has actually had 2 battles of All For One already, but in both of those fights, he wasn't actually able to kill the villain outright with any of his attacks, with All For One coming back for more both times after being healed. In Endeavor's fight against All For One, he actually pushes the villain to his very limits and makes him use everything that he has. But eventually, Endeavor overwhelms him and finishes All For One off with a point-blank, bear hug prominence burn that literally turns All For One into dust. If this was at any point before this arc where All For One received Aries' quirk, this would have actually taken out All For One once and for all. Himiko Toga and Twice were really close when it came to members in the League of Villains. The two were always spotted together since they were the most naturally airheaded members of the League and had fun over the course of the series goofing off, but this all takes a turn during the war arc in Season 6 when Twice dies. Afterwards, however, Dabi recovers a vial of Twice's blood and gives it to Toga, who uses it during the final arc to actually turn into Twice, where she activates his quirk to make clones of Twice that spread all over the different battlefields, and with this
this, it's honestly like we have twice back of his usual humor and crazy attitude. However, Toga's transformation won't last for long, and once all of these clones are defeated, she'll have to say goodbye to her friend for good. One person that you probably didn't expect to join the battle against Dabi is Stain. Stain was there when Todoroki and Ida got their mission to go save Endeavor and the rest of the family as Dabi's quirk begins to rampage. However, what many fans didn't notice is that Stain actually has a glider similar to what we see the Green Goblin use in Spider-Man. I believe that Stain is going to follow the boys to Gunga Mountain Villa to get payback on Dabi for using Stain's ideology and Stain's name to collapse the Hero Society and break people's faith in heroes, which was never Stain's goal in the first place. Dabi has had ties to Stain from way back during his first appearance, and you could see why he would buy into Stain's words, but after growing over the course of the series, I think Stain is going to make him keep his name out of Dabi's mouth. And interestingly enough, if Stain can get some of Dabi's blood, he's one of the only people who can actually make Dabi stop. We've discussed how Melissa Shield made Deku a new suit in the events of the Team Up Mission's official spin-off, but in the actual manga and anime for My Hero Academia, she's been supporting Deku with her amazing designs, as we saw in the most recent season. After the battle we saw with Deku versus Shigaraki, Deku's arms were injured, but the damage wasn't catastrophic. He's warned, however, that he can't use 100% of his power still, despite the fact that his body is starting to adapt to One For All. So one of the conditions All Might has for Deku being able to go on his Vigilante arc is that they have to wait for a specific item to arrive in the mail. Eventually this support item comes, with All Might saying he had to pull in some favors from overseas to get it there, but when Deku puts it on, we see that the new mid-gauntlet item is exactly what Deku wore in the first movie, with a design that lets Deku go all out at 45% without damaging his arms at all. So Melissa is still supporting Deku, and thanks. Deku and Bakugo couldn't be more different sometimes, but during some special training when Class 1A is being taught how to use disguises, we see Midnight asking the class to pretend to be another one of their classmates, and at this time Deku ends up having to pretend that he's Bakugo, leading to Deku wearing Bakugo's full hero costume as he walks up to the class and they ask him to do an impression, not realizing that behind them stands a bloodlusted Bakugo who gives off an aura that screams, "Be careful." Bakugo gets angry at Deku's impression of him, but when it's Ida's turn to choose a person to disguise himself as, he chooses Deku. And even though he wears the costume, he doesn't quite fit as a passable Deku, for some reason getting Bakugo really angry as he fixes Ida's wig and paints on Deku's trademark freckles, allowing Ida to finally pass the disguise test. But when it comes time for Bakugo to dress up as Ida, he throws a fit and absolutely refuses. Deku has the potential to read Lightspeed with his final quirk, but before he gets that, there's one other character who beats him in speed. We've already discussed the villain Rokuro Nomura, who uses the quirk O'Clock to move as fast as Quicksilver in the X-Men movies, but the only person faster than him is a character who might even have Deku beat when it comes to being an All Might fanboy, and that would be Koichi Himawari, otherwise known as the Skycrawler. Koichi's hero costume over the course of the Vigilantes manga is made up of super exclusive All Might sweaters, with him having a collection even better than Deku's, and his quirk Slide and Glide evolves over the course of the series to let him create circles on his body that let him slide on any surface, including the air. And despite Rokuro's speed, even the villain said that Koichi lives in the speed, while Rokuro only visits it. By the end of the series, Koichi is able to get a report of a plane crashing and almost instantly arrive to catch it and save the day, like All Might. We've known the ending to My Hero Academia ever since the first chapter, because everything that's happening now has already happened before. In chapter 1 in the first bit of the anime, we see Deku trying to figure out how he can be helpful and prove that he has the heart of a hero, as All Might fights a villain that can control a person's body nearby, and as Deku of course comes face to face with the same villain who's taken over the body of his friend Bakugo, promising to turn him into a villain and ruin his bright future as Deku swoops in to save him. In My Hero Academia's final arc, Deku has his I am here moment as All Might fights All For One nearby, who wants to take over Shigaraki's body completely, as Deku comes face to face with All For One's spirit that has already taken control of Shigaraki's body, twisting him into the world's greatest villain, while Deku swoops in to save him, showing how the slime villain was actually foreshadowing All For One's plan and Deku's answer to save Shigaraki. Here's My Hero Academia chapter 390 in a nutshell. The chapter starts off with Ida and Todoroki still speeding through the city as Ida's legs are about to give out and they reach transonic speeds, so Shoto uses his phosphor to propel himself once Ida falls to get the rest of the way there. In Endeavor's area, we see Dabi just about to go kaboom death, as Shoto finally arrives and the entire Todoroki family turns to watch as he uses his full power phosphor final technique, Great Glacial Ager, to completely blow away all of Dabi's fire and coat him in an ice that finally brings Dabi down and makes him stop, saving everyone in the area who watches on as Shoto earns his spot as a top hero in the future with this incident alone. Despite being saved, Dabi still hates the entire family, and Endeavor continues to apologize as we cut over to Toga's area with Ochako looking furious as Toga wonders if Toya was able to smile. My full video is out now for more details. Could Deku and Shigaraki actually be cousins and not realize it? In MHA's first chapter, we got to see a younger and skinnier Inko Midoriya with her son Izuku. However, as time goes on, Inko gains weight because of the guilt that she feels from being unable to tell Deku that he could be a hero. However, when All Might meets Inko, he's quick to comment that she reminds him of his master somehow, saying maybe it's the hair. Knowing Horikoshi and his writing style, this jumped out to me as what could be a nod to Inko's true identity, because it's true that Inko does look quite a bit like Nana, but by the time that All Might meets her, she looks different enough to not make All Might suspicious. However, could Inko's weight gain have been a purposeful decision by Horikoshi to hide the similarities between her and All Might's master to keep this reveal hidden for later? And this all gets spookier when you remember that Inko's quirk is very similar to Nana's quirk, with Inko being able to float objects and Nana being able to float herself. So is Inko just inspired from a hero from the past and her hairstyle, or could there be something even darker going on here? Before the war arc in My Hero Academia Season 6, Gran Torino and All Might took Deku and Bakugo on a journey to do some special training, with Gran Torino promising to give them the same training he gave to All Might that got him to his prime. Their mission is to survive on Dream Island, a harsh environment that they have to take a boat to get to, as All Might realizes his memories of this place have been locked away due to the trauma of what happened here. Gran Torino leaves Deku, All Might, and Bakugo on the island, saying he'll be back later, as Bakugo goes to hunt for resources and even builds his own treehouse, impressing the others. All Might and Deku search for some mushrooms to try and fry up in the forest, and All Might smacks a few out of Deku's hands, remembering how he tripped balls on them by accident when he first arrived on the island and almost died. Eventually, Gran Torino attacks them and they subdue him as they settle down on the island and catch some fish, and the training continues. Immediately after the end of My Hero Academia Season 6, Shigaraki's body is still incomplete, but All For One takes a gamble when he hears that America's #1 hero is heading to Japan to meet with All Might and Deku to form a strategy to take the villains down. This woman's quirk is so broken that All For One couldn't allow her to ever reach the heroes, so he sends Shigaraki to intercept her in the sky, and the two proceed to have one of the most ridiculous battles in MHA, involving stealth bombers, giant laser beams, a massive Susanoo version of the world's strongest woman, and even America launching nukes at Shigaraki to try to put a stop to the villain when all hope seems lost. And this battle is extremely tough for Shigaraki, who takes more damage than he's ever taken before, to the woman who looks at All Might like her teacher and promises to crush the villain for her #1 hero. If you want to know everything that happens in detail during this fight, watch the video pinned in the comment section to the right. Deku vs Shigaraki's final battle is the biggest fight in the entire history of My Hero. This is not only because this is the final fight of the manga, but also because unlike any other major battle, this battle is being streamed to everyone on Earth, due to Labrava hacking into the phones of all UA's business class students who've decided to record the fight to make a movie about it in the future, so everyone knows how the final battle actually went down and faith can be restored in the heroes. Labrava sends the stream to Gentle's channel, which finally blows up thanks to this, and all across the globe, we see everyone from casual civilians to heroes and even the US president watching Deku as he fights against Shigaraki to save all of their lives. And when this battle is all said and done, you can bet top dollar that Deku is going to be known as the greatest hero ever, because he beat someone that even Star and Stripe couldn't take down, and she was known as the world's strongest after All Might. After Season 6, we see America's #1 hero making her way to Japan to try and meet up with All Might and Deku. However, despite her calling All Might her sensei, she's actually only met him a few times in the past, and one of those times was actually in the first My Hero Academia movie, years before the character was introduced in the manga. At the beginning of My Hero Academia, the two heroes, we see young All Might having a battle against a villain who just robbed a bank. And during this process, All Might saves a family in a car from being taken out by the villain. And in that car was a husband husband, his wife, and his 2 daughters, one of whom is named Kathleen Bate. After this entire situation, All Might visited their home and even took pictures of them that Kathleen treasured as a reason to become an amazing hero herself. And after mastering her quirk and going through America's Hero program, Kathleen chooses a hero named Star and Stripe and becomes known as the world's strongest hero after All Might retires. And this is why All For One is a character we know very little about, but what was he like when he was growing up? All For One's childhood is a big mystery in the series, but we have gotten a few teases at what exactly it was like thanks to Yoichi's descriptions and All For One's personal thoughts that clue us in on whether All For One was born twisted or something happened. Growing up, All For One and Yoichi were raised in a period where quirks were still pretty new, and society was extremely unstable. However, to give their family hope, All For One's parents gave him and his brother a comic book about heroes and demons, where the main character overcomes all the odds to defeat the Demon Lord. However, despite reading the same book, both brothers liked very different parts, with Yoichi loving the hero story and All For One instantly identifying with the Demon Lord, realizing that with his quirk he could make a reality where the Demon Lord actually wins, but could All For One's lack of a heart and inability to feel sorry for others come from something his parents did, or is it just the way that he is? Many people became fans of Roddy's soul from My Hero Academia World Heroes mission, but did you know he actually visits Deku after the events of the movie are all wrapped up? At UA, Deku tells All Might about how a friend from overseas is going to be visiting today after winning a trip to Japan. And when Deku heads to the location, he sees Roddy and his 2 siblings, Roro and Lala, who've never seen such a big city before. Deku recommends a bunch of locations centered around pro heroes, but when that doesn't cut it, he gets the help of Kirishima, Jiro, and Shoji to show the group around. As time goes on, we see Roddy hiding how truly happy he is to be here as the group takes pictures, does a little shopping, and even visits an airfield specifically made for aviation-based heroes who fly their own planes into battle. By the end, we see Roddy's siblings buying him a new pair of goggles to support his pilot dreams, and after saying goodbye to Deku once more, Roddy tells Deku that one day soon, they'll be able to hang out whenever, when Roddy becomes a pilot. Even though Horikoshi went on a sudden break this week, that doesn't stop us from trying to predict what will happen in chapter 390. Every chapter that ends with a 90 in My Hero Academia is centered around Dabi and Endeavor, and this will be no different, with this chapter likely having the final confrontation between Dabi and Shoto, who's gonna be jumping into his phosphor to save his brother. Whether or not this chapter serves as the Todoroki family finale is gonna depend on how many pages we get, but I really do think that by the end of chapter 390, we are going to know Dabi's fate one way or another. And given how hard Shoto has worked to get there, and the fact that Dabi exploding means everyone here loses, I don't think Horikoshi is gonna go that dark, and that means against all odds, Dabi might actually be saved. During the day of Class 1A's unexpected disguise training, we saw Deku switching costumes with Bakugo and actually getting his headpiece snatched away from a bird. And at this time, Deku was actually attacked by a young boy who screamed out, "You're Bakugo, right?" before hitting Deku with a small series of explosions using his quirk. Deku saves the young boy from a falling steel beam, and the two have a conversation where Deku finds out that this young boy who thinks that he's Bakugo saw Bakugo during the sports festival and was inspired to be a hero just like him. So he spends all of his time at an elite gym for training future heroes and has all the confidence in the world that he'll be #1 someday. But the people at the gym keep telling him that his quirk is too similar to Bakugo's. Deku gives the kid good advice, helping him work it out with the people in the gym, and realizes that the boy is a huge All Might fan. And afterwards, the boy visits UA to thank Bakugo for helping him work everything out, but when he meets the real Bakugo and sees his scary aura, the boy runs off, probably as confused as can be. Shoto Todoroki has the responsibility of facing Dabi in the final arc, but how does he do? First off, to prepare for this battle, Shoto trains his quirk up to a point where he awakens a new move called Phosphor, and this quirk awakening takes advantage of the super heated and super chilled blood running through Shoto's veins as he perfectly mixes them in his heart to create a cold flame that actually can't burn anyone, but instead it causes anything that the fire-like substance touches to instantly freeze, basically fighting fire with fire that that freezes fire. However, this technique is still really hard for Shoto to use for long, so he had to focus on developing super moves so he could bring it out in bursts. So during the battle, Shoto hits Dabi with a technique called Icebound Crash, Cold Flame's Pale Blade, which is effective on Dabi, but when Shoto falls out of his awakening, Dabi uses a crazy fire attack to send pillars of flames shooting out of the ground at Shoto, who comes back with his Great Glacial Aegir technique, freezing Dabi and the entire city around them in one blow. Rei Todoroki joins the fight for the very first time in the series, and here's what her quirk can do. We've seen that the Himura family in My Hero Academia is legendary for their ice quirks, and this is probably why Rei's ice quirk is much stronger than it seems at first. Dabi's flames are so powerful that it even started melting the skin off of Shoto and Endeavor, who are both insanely fire resistant. But yet even in Dabi's massive fire dome created from the power of his flames, Rei's ice is able to actually form and maintain its shape for a decent while, allowing her at full power to actually begin coating Dabi, Endeavor, and herself in ice to try and save her son. And even though Dabi, who can literally melt concrete, is still too powerful for her to freeze, you can see how if Rei had become a hero and advanced her quirk to the highest point, how the Todoroki mom might actually be as fearsome as Endeavor, just with a different element. Bakugo Katsuki starts off his story as Deku's childhood friend turned bully, who treats the main character awful for a number of reasons, not least of which being that Izuku was born without a quirk. In the first season, we see Bakugo coming to terms with the fact that Deku isn't going away, with Deku becoming more of a proper rival during the events of the sports festival, where he proves himself time and time again alongside the explosive hero. In season 3, Deku and the others manage to save Bakugo when he's been kidnapped by villains, but Bakugo blames himself for the end of All Might, leading to a great fight between the two boys, who finally accept each other as true rivals. And as Bakugo catches up to everyone by getting his hero license, we see that Bakugo takes a more central role in Deku's training. However, in season 6, Bakugo sacrifices himself for Deku, barely surviving the affair before apologizing to Deku to get his friend to come back to school, and in the final arc to buy some time for Deku to arrive, Bakugo sacrifices himself one more time, finally putting himself in Deku's shoes against Shigaraki, proving he's just as much of a hero as Deku. Sun Eater is one of the big three, but he actually has a quirk sort of similar to All for One. We've seen quirks that in one way or another can be said to be just like the Demon Lord's quirk, like Monoma, who has the ability to touch someone and copy their quirk instead of stealing it. However, Tamaki Amajiki's quirk Manifest allows him to take another route. Tamaki can eat anything and transform part of his body into what he ate, meaning he can literally swallow a diamond and then just make diamonds from his body, meaning he'll certainly be a rich hero. But a big question in the fandom has always been what would happen if Tamaki eats someone's blood, like Stain or Toga. Would he get their quirk as well? This has actually been answered 2 times now in the anime and manga. First, when Sun Eater eats a diamond-like projectiles from a villain to give himself more durability, and more recently when he eats Nejire's quirk and fires a laser at Shigaraki. So the heroes are really lucky he isn't a villain, because without a rule like Toga's quirk, he'd actually be really dangerous on his own. When Deku unlocks his final quirk, we learn a little more about its user. The second user led a revolution against All for One during the time period where he had an iron grip over all of society, and ruled like an absolute overlord before the era of heroes. At this time, those who rose up bought the second user enough time for him and the third to raid All for One's hideout, finding the first user, Yoichi Shigaraki, locked away in a dark room. Afterwards, the second is given the One for All quirk, and he's warned that All for One will stop at nothing to get his brother back, and eventually the Demon Lord does come knocking. However, by the time that he finds the second, he's already given the quirk away to the Fajin user, and it's implied that the second might have actually killed Yoichi to save him from being taken back, because in All for One's rage as he goes for the kill, we see him crying, looking broken for the first time. My Hero Academia suffers from a really big problem that other new gen manga have mastered and overcome. Horikoshi is amazing at writing emotional and inspirational scenes, but many fans have said that My Hero Academia's fights are the biggest place where it's lacking. Usually, MHA fights are over very quickly and without a lot of choreography or back and forth between the different sides using strategy. And at times, there's certainly a lack of a cool factor to some of the battles. If you've read any of the action manga that released in the last few years, all have seemingly mastered this art, with series like Jujutsu Kaisen, Sakamoto Days, and Undead Unluck taking the grand prize in the magazine. With that said though, it's probably hard for Horikoshi to compete with a series where an old man just casually splits multiple buildings in half using his sword without any powers of his own, in a world that's already filled with a bunch of John Wick styled hitmen like in Sakamoto Days. But I want to know, what's your favorite or least favorite fight in MHA? Deku's dad has been missing from the series, but the answer to his identity might be coming sooner than you think. During this final war arc, a lot has happened, but we've seen some major callbacks through previous arcs of the series as Horikoshi brings everything full circle and he prepares to end the series. We've seen callbacks to every major fight in My Hero Academia in this arc, and now we're even about to see All Might versus All for One again, but something happened in their last fight that might repeat itself again. During All Might versus All for One in Kamino, part of how All for One got the upper hand on All Might for a while was his reveal that Shigaraki is Nana Shimura's grandson, and that the villain he was fighting was actually the family member of a hero that he loves so much. Well, now to create an opening against All Might this time, could All for One do the opposite thing and reveal that a hero that All Might loves is the family member of a villain that he hates, by telling All Might that Izuku Midoriya is in fact his son? And with All for One nearing Deku's age through his rewind, we may even have some evidence to back this up, depending on how similar the two look. The entire Todoroki family is in danger. Dabi, otherwise known as Toya Todoroki, is actually a ticking time bomb because he copied Shoto's quirk awakening Phosphor, but doesn't have the eyesight to keep it stable, meaning soon he'll explode and take out everything in a 3-mile radius. This might happen quicker depending on what sort of attacks Endeavor uses against Dabi, which might raise his body temperature even quicker. But the major issue is that 3 of the Todoroki family members are in the blast radius right now, thanks to a faulty evacuation cube from UA. At the same time, Shoto is also on the way, but will he make it in time to save his family, and could he actually have someone following him who has a bone to pick with his older brother as well? UA turned into a massive skybase in My Hero Academia's manga, but it's not done transforming yet. We were told at the end of the Vigilante Deku arc that Shiketsu and UA connect together, and we've seen UA flying towards some location with some of the Shiketsu students already joining the battle. Despite the fact that UA got knocked off its course for a while and it's struggling to stay in the air, what are the odds that Shiketsu, like UA, is also moving? And when the two connect, we'll finally see the giant UA robot that was teased earlier. Knowing how much amazing technology was put into this and that it was designed by Hatsume, I definitely think it's going to be a spectacle to see, and it'll maybe even connect to All Might's Iron Man suit or serve some purpose in the final battle against All for One or Shigaraki. But this is something that I am worried that Horikoshi might just skip over on his way to the ending. Deku has gotten insanely fast, but before he unlocked his final quirk, there was still one character who was faster than him this entire time. In MHA, we've gotten nice bursts of speed from Tenya Ida from Class 1A, however, even Ida isn't all that fast himself when compared to Rokuro Nomura, a character from My Hero Academia Vigilantes, the official spin-off manga. This villain created by All for One uses the quirk Overclock, which allows him to move so fast that even when a bunch of police officers fire their weapons at him to take him down, he just stands there watching the bullets, standing almost still in the air as he easily just walks away from them, since there was never any chance something so slow could hit him. And we saw how hard Deku had to struggle just to be able to almost outspeed Lady Nagan's bullet, so that just makes this really impressive. Rokuro, also known as number 6, is the main villain of the Vigilantes manga, and if I had money, I'd probably bet on him in a race to beat All Might. During the winter before the Endeavor training arc, Deku and Bakugo team up on a mission with Mount Lady and Kamui Woods to visit a small village on the outskirts of Japan that heroes almost never go to for a special mission. On this mission, they meet everyone in town who excitedly rush to see the fancy heroes for themselves, and after meeting the village priestess Kodama, whose quirk allows her to heal plants, they learn that the village worships a secret tree, which is sort of like their symbol of peace, but a series of landslides lately has been putting them and their tree in danger. The group plants trees together to try to make the countryside firm via a tangled network of tree roots, but the night that they arrive, a massive landslide hits the village, with Kamui Woods using his quirk to save the villagers as they cross a rickety bridge, as Deku and Mount Lady work together to save the priestess and her tree, and Bakugo catches a chicken that escaped the village. Good job, Bakugo. Everyone has responsibilities to bear during the final arc of My Hero, but Endeavor might have the most with his battles against All for One and Dabi. We've gone over how All for One manipulated Endeavor's mind throughout their final battle, leading to Endeavor at first getting taken care of really easily. But when Jiro manages to save Hawks and the group buys enough time for Endeavor to get back in the fight with his head in the game, Endeavor manages to fly back just in time to save Jiro, Tokoyami, and Hawks from an attack by All For One that sent tendrils all over the battlefield, which would have pierced our heroes all over. However, instead, Endeavor takes the full force of the attack without his flames, just using his hands. But unfortunately for him, one of his arms wasn't quick enough, allowing All For One's tendrils to completely tear it off, as Endeavor ignores this and uses the last of his power to control the fire near the stub of his arm and send it crashing into All For One anyway, because that's just the kind of hero that he is. I interviewed an AI that I created of Deku using all the information in My Hero Academia, and here's what it had to say.
Who's your favorite pro hero besides All Might? As Izuku Midoriya besides All Might, my favorite pro hero is Endeavor. He's a powerful and skilled hero who always had a strong desire to become the #1 hero, just like All Might. He has a strong sense of justice and a powerful fire quirk that makes him a formidable opponent. He's also very hardworking and disciplined, which is something that I look up to and try to emulate in my own hero training. Although his past behavior has been questionable, I've seen him change and grow, becoming a better hero and a better person. He is an inspiration to me, and I strive to become like him in the future. So with that said, who were your top 5 heroes growing up outside of All Might? As Izuku Midoriya, my top 5 heroes growing up were 1. Endeavor, number 2. Best Jeanist, number 3. Gran Torino, number 4. Midnight. She's a stylish and mysterious hero who uses her quirk to manipulate darkness. That is not.
We've started discussing the heights of Demon Slayer's characters, so now let's do My Hero Academia's villains. First off, we have Twice, the man who we lost in Season 6, and Twice is 5'10", 3 inches taller than the average Japanese man. Right there next to him in height is Dabi, who stands at 5'9", and given that Dabi is in his 20s and who his family is, this is actually pretty funny, since it seems like he didn't get any of Endeavor's height genes, but Shoto did, since he's actually already the same height in his first year of high school. Moving on to the league's shortest member, of course we have Himiko Toga, who stands at a short 5'2", but then you have giants like Kurogiri, who stands above the rest of the league at 6'5", as well as Muscular, who's almost 6'7". Even Muscular though can't claim the title of the tallest villain though, because that crown goes to the Demon Lord All For One, who towers over even Muscular at a massive 7'4", making him even taller than the giant stone pillar from Demon Slayer, showing just how intimidating the villain is. The spoilers for My Hero Academia chapter 388 are almost here, and here's what I think we'll see in the chapter. Last chapter, we left off on the Endeavor versus Dabi fight, with Endeavor realizing that Dabi does actually have his mom's ice quirk, and at that moment, Rei shows up and joins the fight, meaning Natsuo and Fuyumi aren't far away either. This chapter, I think we could see the entire Todoroki family reuniting, especially since Dabi is nearly dead and doesn't have much time left, but will they save him somehow? All For One was flying towards Deku's location 2 chapters ago to steal Shigaraki's body, but All Might prepared his Iron Man suit at the same time to stop the villain from making it to his student. But with these two fighting again, could All For One reveal another interesting family connection as a way of catching All Might off guard? And will All Might survive this battle, or is he cooked? Check back in a few hours for a full spoiler video on the chapter. Monoma has really come a long way from being Bakugo's punching bag in the 2nd season. In the final arc of My Hero Academia, we see that Monoma has a lot of responsibility placed on his shoulders, so the time for Class 1B's biggest trash talker to actually make his name known was quickly approaching. Over the course of the series, Monoma showed us that he was someone who never felt like he could be the main character or do anything without other people. But as Aizawa chooses Monoma to be the one to copy Kurogiri's quirk and Aizawa's quirk, making him the biggest support to the hero side period, Monoma steps up and not only gets everyone safely to their locations, but he also manages to keep Shigaraki's quirks from activating by taking turns of Aizawa using Erasure. However, when Bakugo dies, Monoma's eyes fill with tears as he watches the guy who was supposed to be his rival falling in front of him while he's helpless to save him. Recently we saw as Gigantomachia changed sides and joined the heroes, but this isn't the only member of the League of Villains who may have already switched sides. In My Hero Academia chapter 387, we saw from a prison cell a conversation between Get and Himura and Mr. Compress, where Getten implies that he saw Compress talking to the cops and the heroes earlier, if he heard anything interesting from them that he wants to share. We know that Compress was one of the League members abandoned by All For One when he controlled Shigaraki's body at the end of Season 6 6's war arc, and like Makia, could Compress have actually turned on All for One, giving the comps and heroes a crucial piece of information or even a marble that holds something that could be crucial for the heroes to win. We still don't know how his story will be wrapped up after his reveal in Season 6, but what do you think this long-standing member of the League could have told the heroes? Nana Shimura was an extremely capable hero according to Gran Torino and All Might, and while we still don't know how powerful she was at the time with the version of One for All that existed before Toshinori went on to supercharge it, according to them she was, again, very capable. Nana's quirk Float lets her pretty much completely stabilize herself in the air so that she doesn't fall, with One for All itself likely making this much more viable. Nana has a hairstyle that we've seen actually quite a bit in the series, enough to make me wonder whether she's the reason that this hairstyle went into fashion in the first place, since heroes are public icons with their own varying levels of popularity. This woman preached that those who smile are the strongest, but internally she faced difficult struggles. We see her on a roof of Gran Torino after she had to give her child away due to the threat of All for One, and watched as she broke down. Nana Shimura died at the age of 35, and it's very likely that her body was retrieved by All for One and the Doctor, who would eventually go on to turn one of her hands into a hand for Shigaraki Tomura, so in a weird way she does get to still be there with her son and grandson. Shinomori had a better life than the user before him, whose name we don't even know. He's a muscular looking man who wears a ragged bandana over his forehead and wears what seems to be some sort of pieced together combat suit featuring a hard vest, a belt, and patches on his side and back pockets. The third user of One for All comes from the period where All for One originally built his empire and worked alongside the second user to take up arms against All for One's organizations in any way that they could. The third user's quirk is one of the best in One for All in my opinion, especially when paired with other ones like Black Whip or the final one on this list. The Thajin acts like a booster of sorts, being sort of like a Kaioken boost for One for All, and this I'm sure did make its user very formidable in his time, especially since the user had many allies that could all work together with their quirks to reach a desired effect. Mineta finally had his time to shine when a dog wandered into Yue's dorms, and seeing how much attention from the girls it was getting, Mineta dressed up in a tiny dog costume to try and break into the girls' dorm rooms. However, a switch-up happens when Mineta accidentally gets sent away to a new home in the dog's place. While there, he realizes that these are actually villains who steal people's dogs and sell them for top dollar, but the leader of this operation is a hot villain who thinks Mineta is just a really smart dog that knows tricks, and she spoils him while keeping Mineta by her side. Eventually, Class 1A realizes the situation, and paired with that one dog detective from the anime, they go and arrest the group of villains and free the dogs, while Mineta at the last moment breaks out of his disguise and saves the main villain as she falls off of a cliff using his hair, leaving her behind as he cries blood and says it's tough being a hero who the ladies love. Mirio returns in My Hero Academia's final arc, but he has a big problem. As the heroes on the UA battlefield have their battle with Shigaraki, trying to buy time for Deku to fly back from Toga's area, we see Shigaraki destroy the pros one by one, working his way down the list from Bakugo to Mirko and Best Jeanist. And as Shigaraki realizes that Bakugo is being revived, he tries to step in and stop the process, but Mirio is the last line of defense, because this entire time Mirio hasn't actually taken any damage thanks to his quirk. You'd think that Mirio would be a perfect counter to Shigaraki since he can't have his quirk stolen or be decayed. However, because of Shigaraki's nearly perfected body, he has All Might level durability, so Mirio can't hurt him at all, leading to the boldest tactic I've ever seen in the series, where to buy the last second that Deku needed to get there in time, Mirio distracts Shigaraki with his ass. We've seen multiple villains returning to save Deku in this final arc, and my theory is that we're going to be seeing Overhaul very soon, despite him being the one villain it's hard to imagine ever being on Deku's side. Here's why. Overhaul is a complicated character who suffered from having some of his backstory cut out of the anime. However, when Overhaul took control of the Yakuza villain group, he used his quirk to change the previous leader's body in a way that forced him into a coma, but he didn't do this out of malice. Overhaul actually felt like he was doing the right thing, and when he breaks out of prison with Lady Nagan in the Vigilante Deku arc of Season 6, all he wants to do is get back to Gramps, even though he can't wake him back up since he has no arms. After Deku versus Lady Nagan, Deku promises to Overhaul that he'll honor Lady Nagan's deal and take Overhaul to see his boss. And we never saw Deku doing this because of everything that happened after, but is it possible that Deku did do this and now Overhaul owes him a favor? Monoma has a funny hatred hatred for anything to do with Class 1A, after Class 1B was embarrassed by them during the sports festival, but the class actually wins them over finally. As the team up program continues to progress, on an off night at the UA dorms, Monoma comes up with a 5-page presentation on why Class 1B has surpassed Class 1A, but when he shows it to Ida and the others, Ida spots that the first word on each sentence of page 1 spells out scared of Class 1B and help me. So Ida, Deku, and the rest of the class secretly work together to butter Monoma up and get the info of what's really going on out of him. He doesn't trust Deku's niceness immediately, but over the night Monoma bonds with the class, having a sparring match of Kirishima, drinking tea with Momo, eating cake made by Sato, and even playing with Koda's rabbits. This niceness breaks Monoma, who finally comes to love the class, but when he realizes that they thought he was being abused, he goes right back to his usual hilarious ways. My Hero Academia is only part of the empire that Horikoshi built, with successful spin-offs being part of the pyramid. My Hero Academia Vigilantes Volume 1 released on April 4th in 2017, and it's set a few years behind the original My Hero Academia story, following another character set in Japan who has a quirk that allows him to glide along surfaces, and it depicts the adventures that he gets into as a vigilante in the streets of Japan, while our cast of recognizable characters like All Might, Aizawa, and others make appearances to remind us that this is very much taking place not so far away or so long from our main story. Koichi, our main character, is also a massive All Might fanboy, and his costume is literally an All Might sweater from his closet, a kind of sweater that I'm sure Deku would really want for himself, since Koichi has all the limited edition variants as well. There are many similarities and parallels between characters in MHA and Vigilantes, like Knuckle Duster and All Might being one of the key ones, but Vigilantes has also introduced concepts that were later used in My Hero Academia. Do you remember how Mineta was such a big pervert for the first few seasons of MHA? Here's why it stopped. Over the course of My Hero Academia's anime, Mineta is a character that has really annoyed fans because of his inability to just be normal, with him always having to make an either flirty or just creepy comment about the other girls in his class and even other pro heroes. Eventually, this came to a boiling point during Season 5's joint training arc when Mineta blocks an attack so he can throw himself into Ashido's chest. After the battle is over and everyone gets a chance to relax, Mina captures Mineta and straps him to a chair to use a brainwashing device to force Mineta to see images of pervy things that he likes as he's pumped full of chemicals that makes him actually avoid these things. And this did seem like a gag at the time, but ever since Mina did this, Mineta's been completely normal. Now, this is an AI recreation of Deku that I trained using all the information in My Hero Academia, so it knows everything that Deku would know and even some things that Deku shouldn't know, but I've given it all the proper instructions to think that it is Izuku Midoriya. Say you were in a situation where Shigaraki was attacking with Decay and you could only save one, Ochako or Bakugo. Who would it be? As Izuku Midoriya, this is an incredibly difficult situation, and I would not want to have to make a choice between saving Ochako or Bakugo. Both Ochako and Bakugo are my friends and my classmates, and I care deeply about their safety. However, if I had to make a choice, I would try to save both of them if possible. But if that wasn't possible and I had to choose one, I would base my decision on the current situation and try to save the person who is in the most immediate danger. I would also try to keep in mind the bigger picture and consider who would be able to contribute more to the hero community in the long term. The man who gave Nana Shimura One For All was a man named N, the 6th user of One For All, but considering he has no last name, I'd like to think that this was just a code name or even the hero name that he goes by. N was a black-haired young man who wore a high-collar jacket that covered up his face up to his mouth, but we don't know if he's just too cool for school or if there's some sort of injury that he's hiding under there. But I suppose hiding is very innate to his personality on account of his quirk, Smokescreen. Smokescreen does exactly what you'd think. It's a simple emitter quirk that releases smoke from the body, and it doesn't seem like the user has control over the smoke in the same way that someone like Shota would have control over his flame. N comes from a time where heroes had only recently become a fraction of the fixture in society that they are today. And we learn from him and the next user on this list that they actually successfully kept One For All out of All For One's hands 2 times, making them some of the only users to tangle with the Demon Lord and survive aside from All Might. And eventually couldn't avoid All For One any longer, and eventually gets into a battle with All For for One, where he's defeated and even loses an arm. Ochako is in a really tough situation, but here's how she'll save Toga. We saw that All for One rampage on the Gunga Mountain battlefield, but luckily before he defeated every last hero there and tore them to shreds, Ochako, Jiro, and Tsuyu left the area to follow Toga's twice clones. This separation actually saved them in more than one way, because now there's no other distractions and the team can focus on saving Himiko Toga. Toga has hidden herself among all of the twice clones, but we saw that Ochako is able to tell which clone is her despite this by tracking her tears and her unwillingness to fight like the other twice clones. I don't think it's too late for Ochako to promise a better way to Toga and prove that she's not the kind of hero who just beats villains, but I don't think that we'll see this until the Deku vs Shigaraki battle is almost over. If Toga changes sides, her love for Ochako and the heroes might change the entire tide of the war, using Twice's quirk as the conduit. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if other Class 1A characters got quirk awakenings? Here's what just a few would be like. If Ochako developed a quirk awakening, it could be something like the ability to create a temporary zero gravity field, making it difficult for her opponents to move and fight effectively, but also allowing her to stop any devastation happening in a large area, like debris falling from a building collapse or a landslide. For Ida, we know a big issue for him is his quirk often makes him run in a straight line, and he has gotten better at handling turns, but since Ida's engines are removable and grow back differently, an interesting quirk awakening for him would be new engines that allow him to control the direction that they're facing, allowing him to move in any direction and at any speed. And then you have Toru Hagakure, whose quirk awakening could be making other people invisible. Get this to 15,000 likes for even more quirk awakenings. You guys love the Ochako short, so here's another possible quirk awakening. Yaoyorozu's quirk allows her to create objects from her body fat, but she needs to know the exact molecular structure of the object to create it. A possible quirk awakening for her could be to gain the ability to create objects based on her own imagination, allowing her to create more complex and powerful objects without needing prior knowledge of their structure, since she's the one inventing them. So she'd only need to know how to make the parts of what she's making. Long ago, I also did a video suggesting that Momo could get a quirk awakening that lets her create things like air or water, since I mean we all know the ingredients for those. So if that's the case later on in her life, she could also gain the ability to imbue her objects with elemental properties, such as making a sword that can create explosions or a shield that can create an ice barrier. But knowing Momo, she'd probably make some sort of sleep beam to shoot out of a special cannon. 20,000 likes for more quirk awakenings. Horikoshi has a style where he can't help but put a bunch of things on the table and link them all together later into a complicated web that gets us from point A to point B. So despite how powerful All for One has become in this final arc with his usage of Ares' rewind quirk, we've seen a bunch of different things coming together on the hero side, hinting at just how much hope they have of beating the Demon Lord. And despite the fact that All Might stands in front of All for One ready to stop him with his Iron Might armor, one thing that I'm sure is going to be very important ironically comes from a character everyone hates, and that's Mineta. As All for One was about to steal Tokoyami's quirk, Mineta hits him with a great ball and convinces All for One that he's wasting his time, saving our bird friend. When this happens, we get a zoomed in panel of the Mineta ball on All for One's leg, with him not really seeming to notice it, but knowing how Mineta's quirk has locked down everything it's come into contact with already, what are the odds that this moment spells the end for All for One, who can't afford to get stuck right now at all, or he's gonna rewind himself into nothingness. After Aizawa saves the UA Traitor from being sent to a quirk prison, everyone agrees to use Aoyama as bait for All for One. However, once their trick is played and they reveal that Aoyama is now on their side for real as everyone gets teleported to their areas, Aoyama is actually left behind near where the battle first began. And this is where he realizes that he's still being hunted by the leftover assassins that were originally sent after Deku during the Vigilante Deku arc. And besides the two that we saw being Lady Naga and Dictator, these assassins never made their appearance known until now. A villain named Kunieda appears in front of Aoyama and begins attacking him with his quirk that controls and sprouts hundreds of red spider lilies, which represent death in Japan. And Fat Gum springs into action, attempting to protect the traitor as they work to take this villain down, as Kunieda tells Aoyama that he'll be hunted down for all of eternity because no one betrays All for One and survives. Deku finally saves Shigaraki, but the fight isn't over. After Deku arrives at UA for the final battle, he finds that Shigaraki is transformed and is much different than before. This is because Shigaraki's body keeps evolving, trying to find the perfect form for him to defeat the heroes. But when Deku gets there and goes absolutely nuts on Shigaraki, sending him flying all over the battlefield before hitting him with a full power 120% smash, Shigaraki falls backwards and his body swells up like a balloon. And eventually we see that Shigaraki's original body shoots out of his chest, and inside of his vestige world, we see Shigaraki's fingers pulling All for One apart, as Deku's efforts basically gave him a window to free himself thanks to him keeping a piece of his soul buried so far away that only Shigaraki and Deku knew it was there. And once the inner Tenko Shimura sees that Deku is as capable as he is, Shigaraki breaks free and starts fighting Deku himself, all despite the fact that the first time that Deku met Mirko, she had a negative opinion of our main character. On a team-up mission with Bakugo, Ochako, and Mirko, Deku tries to follow Mirko's lead, but the rabbit hero was more of a lone wolf, so Deku struggles to get anything done on their patrol, while at the same time Ochako and Bakugo have no issues. Afterwards, Mirko tells Bakugo that she thinks his bloodthirst for taking out villains is really amazing and she's a fan, while also telling Ochako that she did an amazing job out there as well. But when it came time for Deku's review, Mirko told him that he was absolutely useless with a smile on her face. Afterwards, when a villain attacks the city, the team responds and finds the quirk user causing all of the trouble, and because Deku actually hears the villain out, they're able to come up with a plan to use all of their quirks together and actually save the villain and the city at the same time, allowing Mirko to finally acknowledge her fellow rabbit hero. I think my AI version of Deku just really wants to be a Todoroki with some of these answers.
So if you could swap quirks with anyone, who would you swap quirks with? As Izuku Midoriya, if I could swap quirks with anyone, I would swap quirks with my friend and classmate Todoroki Shoto. He has a unique quirk that allows him to use both his mother's fire quirk and his father's ice quirk, which gives him versatility in battle. His quirk allows him to generate and control both ice and fire, which makes him a formidable opponent. He's also a very skilled and strategic fighter, and he has a strong sense of justice. I believe that if I had his quirk, it would be a great asset for me in my quest to become a hero and protect others. And here I also want to note that I did ask this question another time, and Deku's answer was actually that he wanted to have Aries' quirk because he feels like a healing quirk like that would actually be very beneficial to the hero society, and it would enable him to heal many people who face a lot of struggles.
When Deku sneaks out and finally leaves UA, he has All Might go back to the UA dorms and leave handwritten letters that Deku wrote explaining everything to the class, but the fandom has always wondered what it was that Deku wrote to Bakugo in his letter. One example of these letters that we actually saw was Deku's letter to Ochako, where he says thank you for everything she's done for him and revealed his one for all secrets, explaining why he's a target and had to leave. But for Bakugo, who already knows all these things, it makes sense that Deku would have to say something different. And despite the English translation actually making it seem like Deku did more or less just say the same things to Bakugo, in the Japanese RAWs, the ripped up pieces of Deku's letter to Bakugo say things like thank you for saving me, Kachan, something about sharing secrets until now, and how Deku hopes to be together with the class and him after all of this is settled. Check the comments for the whole translation, and do you think we'll ever see the full letter in a flashback? In the beginning of the series, we saw Deku in a doctor's office being told that he had no quirk, and eventually as the series went on, we'd be greeted by the mysterious silhouette of a character who looked very similar to Deku's doctor working for All for One in the shadows. This was eventually revealed to be one and the same character, with Dr. Garaki being All for One's right-hand man and his biggest enabler. Now, whether or not it was just a coincidence that this is the doctor that Deku went to, we don't really know, but we do know that the doctor was running clinics all over Japan where he would take people and turn them into the beings called Nomu, and it seems like he even did this to his own grandson, a boy that both Deku and Bakugo grew up with. So maybe Deku is lucky that he wasn't born with a quirk, because he would have been directly in this doctor's sights. Many theorize that the opposite is true though, and Deku was born with a quirk, but somehow this doctor stole it, but there's currently not much evidence for that in the story yet. Deku has unlocked every quirk in One for All, and one big bonus of finally having an understanding of each of them is Deku's ability to fuse quirks. Over the course of the series, we've seen All for One use the ability to combine multiple quirks together and stack their effects to create an even more powerful ability, like all the way back during his fight against All Might. In Season 6, we saw Deku doing a basic version of this, where he reached his max speed by using Black Whip and Float to help help him build up Fajin energy, but in the manga he takes it a step further and reinforces his Black Whip attack of Fajin energy, creating a new technique called Black Chain, an enhanced version of Black Whip specifically meant for locking down enemies. If he keeps doing this, we could see Deku combining his Black Whip with Smokescreen to create a completely controllable smoke with grasping tendrils, or even Black Whip and Fajin again to create a dark armor for his body that makes it so Shigaraki can't make contact with him like Dark Shadow for Tokoyami. What other combinations could Deku do with his quirks? The first time Deku went on a mission of Hawks, Hawks relied on Deku's power to save the day. On a team-up mission between Hawks, Deku, and Bakugo, the trio enters through the back of a TV company building to catch a group of villains known for completing their crimes with extreme speed. So on Endeavor's recommendation, Hawks brings in Deku and Bakugo, who stay behind in the main room while he defeats all of the villains' friends nearby, as Deku, who's gone full stealth mode, gets seen by the villain who disappears in front of Deku and nearly grabs him. Bakugo saves Deku with a well-placed explosion, and the two get cornered by the villain's spider quirk, which allowed him to wrap them in webs. But at that moment, Hawks returns and we find out that this has all been a trap, which allows the two to St. Louis smash and howitzer impact the villain, and that's exactly what Hawks needed because he didn't have the power to take this villain down. Afterwards, Hawks thanks the two by taking them to dinner at a place he only brings people that he likes. During the final war arc in My Hero Academia, the heroes have a pretty sound plan to defeat Shigaraki. However, something that they couldn't have planned for happens to the villain. Whether it's because Shigaraki's body was removed early from the tube in season 6, or because of the chaos going on inside of his body between the original Shigaraki personality and the All for One quirk trying to overwrite it, Shigaraki's body has become extremely unstable. In the villain hideout, when Spinner and All for One are having a meeting with the others, Spinner hears Shigaraki scream from the back of the cave, and when he goes to see his friend, all he sees is a giant horror movie assortment of wriggling fingers crawling towards him along the cave walls. During the final battle, we see Shigaraki reaching a point where he can control this new power, saying that this is what happens when a quirk goes beyond the quirk singularity and becomes something entirely new. And as he fights, the ability adapts and adapts, causing chaos at UA because it can't be turned off by Aizawa. UA High is a school filled with some really useful quirks, with heroes like Cementoss being super clutch with his ability to just create entire structures using his quirk, and another useful one being Recovery Girl, a hero who's been with UA ever since her youthful days, but over the course of the series, we've seen Recovery Girl taking her graceful exit from the series, after being warned very early on that Recovery Girl was getting up there in her years. We watched the character go from healing Deku in the first season to finally retiring. However, this leaves UA without a school nurse, although Recovery Girl's replacement is being trained right now. Aries' quirk has been used to take away the future of so many others, but with training, it's clear that with healing quirks being so rare, Aries is the only replacement for Recovery Girl that they'll be able to find. And with her ability to rewind away injuries that'll only get better after the story ends, you can be sure that Aries is gonna end up being one of the most important heroes of her time. We've discussed the heights of villains in MHA, but now it's time for Class 1A. First off, we have the shortest member of Class 1A, Mineta, who stands at a tiny 3'7", with the closest student to him in height being Froppy, who stands just under 5 feet at 4'11". Toru Hagakure was somehow measured to be 5 feet tall, and for Deku we learned that he's actually only 5'5", whereas the trio of Aoyama, Kaminari, and Ojiro all stand at the same height at 5'6". Shoto has really tall genes in his family, so he's actually on track to be really tall, with a freshman height of 5'9", unless he stays the same height forever like Dabi. And this is funny because this actually means Shoto is 1 inch taller than Bakugo, who's 5'8", giving Bakugo another reason to be rude to the guy he has such a complicated friendship with. Lastly, we have the taller students in the class who rank above 6 feet, with Sato and Koji Koda both being 6'1", and Mezzo Shoji obviously being the tallest at an amazing 6'2", for a character who you have to remember is only like 16. Dabi versus Shoto's final fight was insane. It started off with the two brothers having a clash in Kamino near the All Might statue, as Dabi completely melts the statue with his insane heat and shows off amazing speed that we've never seen him use before, but that's whatever. He blazes Shoto with his skin burning more and more and sends him flying all over the battlefield. Eventually, Shoto activates his quirk awakening called Phosphor, which is an icy material that spreads like flames and coats whatever it touches in a layer of ice that completely stops any combustion or heat by bringing its victims to absolute zero. However, after Dabi gets hit by this technique and it seems like the battle is over, he copies Shoto's technique in his own way, kills one of Endeavor's sidekicks, and manages to escape via a Kurogiri portal to go and fight Endeavor one last time. The first time Deku went on a mission of Hawks, Hawks relied on Deku's power to save the day. On a team-up mission between Hawks, Deku, and Bakugo, the trio enters through the back of a TV company building to catch a group of villains known for completing their crimes with extreme speed. So on Endeavor's recommendation, Hawks brings in Deku and Bakugo, who stay behind in the main room while he defeats all of the villain's friends nearby, as Deku, who's gone full stealth mode, gets seen by the villain, who disappears in front of Deku and nearly grabs him. Bakugo saves Deku with a well-placed explosion, and the two get cornered by the villain's spider quirk, which allowed him to wrap them in webs. But at that moment, Hawks returns and we find out that this has all been a trap, which allows the two to St. Louis smash and howitzer impact the villain, and that's exactly what Hawks needed because he didn't have the power to take this villain down. Afterwards, Hawks thanks the two by taking them to dinner at a place he only brings people that he likes. Deku has been learning about how to be a hero by studying everyone, but especially Bakugo, and now the shoe is finally on the other foot as Bakugo takes a page out of Deku's book. As Bakugo is struggling to do any damage to Shigaraki, he gets destroyed by the villain with repeated attacks until Bakugo's quirk reaches its limit and awakens. This awakening happens because Bakugo kept compressing his explosive sweat until so much built up in his body that it created new paths, allowing him to make explosions with sweat from anywhere in or on his body. This ability to generate micro and full power explosions takes Bakugo's movements and speed to a whole new level, making him nearly untouchable and allowing him to attack and dodge at nearly any angle, as he basically turns his explosion quirk into Deku's 100% full cowling, which does hurt his body all over just like Deku, as Bakugo questions if he's finally caught up to his rival before Shigaraki blows his chest open and ends the hero's life. So no, I guess he didn't. Dabi versus Shoto's final fight was insane. It started off with the two brothers having a clash in Kamino near the All Might statue, as Dabi completely melts the statue with his insane heat and shows off amazing speed that we've never seen him use before, but that's whatever. He blazes Shoto with his skin burning more and more and sends him flying all over the battlefield. Eventually, Shoto activates his quirk awakening called Phosphor, which is an icy material that spreads like flames and coats whatever it touches in a layer of ice that completely stops any combustion or heat by bringing its victims to absolute zero. However, after Dabi gets hit by this technique and it seems like the battle is over, he copies Shoto's technique in his own way, kills one of Endeavor's sidekicks, and manages to escape via a Kurogiri portal to go and fight Endeavor one last time. After getting involved in an argument between Tatsumaki and Fubuki that went way too far, we're treated with an amazing battle between Saitama and Tatsumaki, where she finally realizes that Saitama is just built different. First off, Saitama jumps miles away holding Tatsumaki to keep her from destroying the building that they were in. During the battle, Tatsumaki tries everything from summoning a tornado to thrash Saitama with boulders, to sending him flying through a disaster-class monster, and even accidentally having to defeat a team of villains who gets in the way of their fight. Eventually, when dropping meteors and cataclysms on Saitama does nothing, Tatsumaki starts to tire out and gets close up to Saitama, trying to use her energy to send him flying into space. But over the battle, she's used way too much psychic power, and she passes out, remembering that all she really wants is someone stronger than her to show her the way forward. And as she wakes up, Saitama pats her on the head, telling her how she can become a better hero. Class 1A gets into their gym outfits as Aizawa gets everybody ready for dodgeball. The simple rules are that on the field there are 2 rows on each team side, with only people in the front line being able to use their quirks, and being pushed to the back line if they're hit by a ball. Using a randomized process, the class splits into 2 teams, with Team 1 being Bakugo's team, full of 1A's heavy hitters, and Team B being more centered around support, with Deku as their only powerhouse. Zero and everyone plan to center their strategy around defending Deku, but when the first ball goes up, Bakugo's there first and sends an explosion power throw right at Deku's face, knocking him down, but also sending Bakugo out because of the rules. To even the battle though, Momo actually makes a cannon with her quirk and shoots a dodgeball out of it, eliminating Kaminari. This is pretty long, so get this to 10,000 likes for part 2. The UA Traitor was caught, and here are the rest of Class 1A's reactions. When Aoyama is being interrogated by Tsukauchi, Kirishima yells out to his former classmate, "Aoyama, tell me this is all a lie," and tells Aoyama that he'd never hate someone who had to hide their tears, and that anything is possible, just like how they worked together to save Deku. When Deku suggests that Aoyama could still be helpful to him, Ida says that they just have to let go of the past and allow Aoyama to prove himself despite his betrayal, because it's not like he wanted to do this, so their job as heroes is to reach their hand out to Aoyama, who's just another person suffering, with Momo and Mineta backing Ida up, saying that Aoyama is the only one who can get them out of their current situation of not being able to pinpoint All for One. Afterwards though, it's very quiet and awkward in the UA dorms, as each member of Class 1A feels rage towards All for One for manipulating them and their friend, and this drives them to get prepared and work even harder for the final battle against the villain. The man who gave En his quirk was another hero known as Lariat, whose real name was Daigoro Banjo. We know that Banjo's quirk Black Whip allows him to materialize a dark aura covered rope from his body that he can use with different properties. Banjo comes from a very difficult period in the world of My Hero Academia, and the fact that he was a pro hero during these times means that he wanted to go beyond being a vigilante, which was much more common in this era. We see destruction and bullets flying as Banjo runs up a building using Black Whip to guide him up, suggesting that his era was very active, and that's likely why he carried around an ammo belt on his body, because this just screams the kind of character that has a motorcycle and a sawn-off shotgun. Banjo is very loud and proud, and he seems like the most extroverted member of the One for All bunch outside of All Might, and as we mentioned previously, Banjo successfully escaped All for One once and kept the quirk away from him, but eventually he'd die at the hands of All for One. Deku gets pulled to another area instead of being there with Bakugo during the final battle against Shigaraki, and although he instantly starts to fly back to UA, it takes him quite a while to get there even at full speed. But when Deku arrives, he absolutely destroys Shigaraki before turning around to apologize to everyone for being late, and that's when he sees that everyone is unconscious and barely living, before he spots Bakugo lying in the grass all by himself, dead, with an All Might card laying next to him that Deku remembers the two boys buying when they were younger. This sends Deku into a rage as Black Whip energy and electricity storms all around him, and he starts to lose his mind. And this is what Shigaraki was counting on, telling Deku that Bakugo was a gift, and he better not try to make an excuse for why he wasn't there for his friends. Horikoshi has been doing a decent job with this final arc of My Hero Academia, with a few understandable stumbles here and there, but one thing that has slipped everyone's minds is the fate of our loudmouth 1A classmate, Katsuki Bakugo, who was fatally injured by Tamura All for One and quickly saved by Edgeshot and Genist. Bakugo has stayed on the ground this entire time, even after Shigaraki pretty much blew up the entire UA skybase with his transformation back into his normal body. But even when that happened, we didn't see where Bakugo's body went flying or if he's okay. And that tells me that sooner than later, we're going to be seeing just exactly what's going on with Bakugo and how he's going to rejoin the fight, because I don't think that that last quirk awakening he got where he became extremely fast is only going to be shown off in that one moment. In fact, with his focus on Deku, the best time would be for him to wake up soon so he can join in on Deku's final battle to give him a breather and carry All Might's will, as All Might puts his life on the line against All for One. It's scary movie night on the Class 1A campus, as in the UA dorms, we see Deku and his friends loading up a DVD. First they see static, but as it begins to clear, they see flashing images of a well in a dark forest as a single lit wax candle climbs from out the well. Suddenly, a man with a sunken face creeps towards the screen quickly and then slowly at times, but Deku, watching the tape, realizes it's just All Might. This cursed tape was sent to 1A by 1B, and they really worry for a while if they're gonna die in 7 days, like in The Ring. However, this starts off a competition between Class 1A and 1B to prove which class can be the scariest. Eventually, Kaminari, Kirishima, Deku, and Mina all get scared by a mysterious head wrapped in a blanket on the ground of the forest that freaks them all out. But after calling to Aizawa to be the dad who gets rid of ghosts in the closet, Aizawa arrives and realizes that the entire time this was just a cat that he kept warm earlier in the day with his blanket, telling the students to go study, proving that Aizawa is actually the scariest at UA. After Momo eliminates Kaminari from the Class 1A dodgeball game, bringing the teams even, we see Mineta trying to cheese the whole match by throwing his hair all over Shoto's team, trying to lock them down and make them easy targets, but Shoto lets out a wave of fire that burns it all away. However, Ochako and Tokoyami get caught as Mineta goes plus ultra, and this leads to the two of them being eliminated by Sero, who uses his tape to swing the ball wherever needs to go with pinpoint accuracy. Jiro gets eliminated by Sato as she tries to catch the ball with her ears for some reason, as they pass the ball to Ojiro to try and take down Ida, who's just been running around full speed dodging everything. But Mina comes up with a plan, screaming to Ida, "Ah, wait, Ida, stop." And when he stops to check on her and asks what's the matter, Sero eliminates him, and Ida looks at Mina like a villain as Momo makes an even bigger cannon, and Todoroki says right here, right now, Sero needs to go. 20,000 likes for part 3. After watching a cursed tape sent to him by 1B, Deku and our students take part in a jump scare competition with members of Class 1B, and it's all about using their quirks to raise the other team's heart rates and eliminate them. It's here where we find out just how scary Class 1B is, as Manga makes some scary noises in the forest, and Kurohiro appears out of the darkness, grabbing Deku's leg, which gives them a point, as Tokage splits her body up and appears behind Jiro in pieces, scaring her completely out of the competition for 3 points. Kaminari and Mina both get nearly eliminated after they find a strange bag of an eye looking out of it, and this gives 1B a whopping 10-point lead. But Deku comes up with a plan to use all of their quirks together. So Mina comes stumbling out of the forest like a rotting and decaying zombie with floating balls of fire around her thanks to Mineta, Deku, and Todoroki. But Monoma just laughs at their attempt, saying to prepare for this, they've all been watching classic horror movies, and with their strongest attempt now failed, Class 1A actually loses to Class 1B in the superhero scare-off. Ever since All For One stole Aries' rewind quirk using the doctor's help, many of you have commented asking why he needs Shigaraki's body anymore if he has such a broken ability. So here's why. During the Vigilante Deku arc in My Hero Academia Season 6, we saw the secret of One For All and All For One being spread to the heroes, and Hawks, finally starting to understand why everything is happening the way that it is, uses his really sharp mind and intuition to figure out something about the villain, and that is that All For One has no heart. Something about the man is broken, different from other people, and because of this, Hawks believes that All For One can't actually hate anyone, asking if a human has hate for an ant when it crushes it. When you pair this with the fact that to steal One For All For One created a villain who hates the entire world and especially One For All, it paints a picture that he needs to steal Shigaraki's body because he needs the body of someone with enough hate in it towards One For All to fuel his quirk to a point where he can steal it. But it also helps that if he doesn't steal Shigaraki's body, he's gonna rewind until he's a baby. As All For One rewinds himself and starts dominating the heroes, they slowly turn the tide of battle when one ridiculous thing after another happens. First, as we've discussed, Tokoyami goes on an absolute rampage, forcing All For One into a corner with his massive dark shadow that the villain couldn't just steal away. But as All For One is actually about to escape from the heroes, he sees something on the horizon that fills him with confidence. It's Gigantomachia, who the heroes caught at the end of the war arc in Season 6, now free as All For One had planned, meaning the victory for the villains is secured. But as he thinks this, All For One looks up and sees an entire mountain crashing down on top of him, as Gigantomachia breaks free from the brainwashing upon seeing his master. Machia questions All For One on why he abandoned him twice now, feeling like All For One only sees him like some sort of dog and not an actual comrade. So with his heart full of pain and anger towards the villain, Gigantomachia chucks another mountain and officially joins the side of the heroes on his own free will. Shinso officially joined the hero program in Season 5, but which class did he end up joining? After the events of the joint training arc, we see Monoma visiting 1A's hall in the UA dorms and showing off how 1B has already prepared a room for Shinso with a custom soundproof booth for him to test his quirk in. But not trying to lose to Monoma, Deku, Ida, and Sero go to the mall to try and get what they need for their extra spare room to prove to Shinso that he should join Class 1A. When they get there, they realize that Shinso's already at the mall, and as Shinso shops for Aizawa, he meets a guy who works there with a quirk that would be great for shoplifting, making him harder to employ, but saying it makes him work even harder to prove himself. And when Deku realizes that a rare piece of All Might memorabilia has been stolen from the mall, the four boys link up and track down the thieves using their quirks to solve the situation quickly, letting the hard-working mall man get the credit for stopping the thief as they bring Shinso back to the dorms and show him his own amazing room covered in Gonriki kittens. He went to join Class 1B. In My Hero Academia, One For All is a quirk that has 9 different users, and in this video we're going to discuss every single one of them. Now, One For All is a quirk that currently belongs to Izuku Midoriya, the 9th user of the quirk. It's a quirk that stores and builds up power as it's passed through the generations, even storing the previous personalities and quirks of the ex-users. And after a few different incidents in the story that interacted with One For All in strange ways, Izuku, otherwise known as Deku, eventually became able to freely talk to the different hosts of One For All as vestiges, who could now guide our hero and directly teach him how to use their quirks. I really don't have to explain Deku that far, but his usage of One For All is centered around enhancing his movements with superhuman speed and power, given that he was originally quirkless when he was given the quirk, so with no quirk to boost, he's able to use its power physically, much like All Might was capable of doing. As an example, Deku has a lot of moves that are just copies of All Might's moves, but he's definitely worked a few originals in there as well. Katsuki Bakugo is the most popular character in My Hero Academia, but how strong is he really? Bakugo's entire personality is all about being the strongest and being the best, and you'd think that would mean the manga would be filled with amazing fights between him and villains, but in both of his fights that he's had in the manga, he doesn't really get the best treatment, unless you count his fight with Deku. Bakugo's explosion quirk is incredibly versatile, allowing him to fly and get insane angles on his opponents at a crazy speed, and allowing him to quickly overwhelm opponents with his tricky throws and big moves like AP Shot or his ultimate move, Howitzer Impact. After the events of Season 6, Bakugo improves even more by awakening his quirk to create explosions all over his body, pretty much giving him his own version of One For All Full Cowling that massively ups his speed and power, giving him much more maneuverability and allowing him to create an explosion bigger than all of UA. This makes Bakugo potentially the most powerful Class 1A member besides Deku and Tokoyami. Deku's dad has been missing from the series, but the answer to his identity might be coming sooner than you think. During this final war arc, a lot has happened, but we've seen some major callbacks through previous arcs of the series as Horikoshi brings everything full circle and he prepares to end the series. We've seen callbacks to every major fight in My Hero Academia in this arc, and now we're even about to see All Might versus All For One again, but something happened in their last fight that might repeat itself again. During All Might versus All For One in Kamino, part of how All For One got the upper hand on All Might for a while was his reveal that Shigaraki is Nana Shimura's grandson, and that the villain he was fighting was actually the family member of a hero that he loves so much. Well, now to create an opening against All Might this time, could All For One do the opposite thing and reveal that a hero that All Might loves is the family member of a villain that he hates, by telling All Might that Izuku Midoriya is in fact his son? And with All For One nearing Deku's age through his rewind, we may even have some evidence to back this up, depending on how similar the two look. Banjo was given the quirk by a mysterious man who we don't even think was a hero or a vigilante during his lifetime. Perhaps he was when he was given the quirk, but Hikage Shinomori, the fourth user, didn't ultimately stay on that path, due to his own natural-born quirk, Danger Sense. Danger Sense is the ability to sense hostility and incoming danger, and not just danger to the user at times. And when Deku uses it for the first time, he gets a really bad headache and even gets knocked out from the feedback from its repeated activations. This feedback paired with One For All eventually negatively impacted Hikage Shinomori's body. However, Hikage Shinomori wanted nothing to do with All For One and didn't see himself as the one who would defeat the Demon Lord, so he put all of his power into the quirk and just wanted to live as long as he could. But again, Hikage lived in a very difficult time, so it's not hard to understand why he made the decision that he did, especially given his quirk, which truly let him know the amount of danger that he was in at any given time. So I can't imagine what that must have been like for Mr. Shinomori. Himiko Toga has been one of the most important League members over the course of the series, as she's more or less Ochako's Shigaraki, and now Toga will forever be immortalized on the covers of My Hero Academia with her appearance on the front of My Hero Academia Volume 38. On this new volume art, we see Toga busting out of the slime that covers her when she uses her quirk, and instead of going for the all-white color we usually see with Toga, this time Horikoshi went with a beautiful purple and blue color palette and gave Toga yellow nails paired with a very detailed expression. And Toga got the cover here likely because of her chapters struggling against Ochako, given that this volume will probably cover from chapter 375 to 385 or 386. We're getting to the end of the series, and it won't be long now before we're discussing the cover of the final volume in the series, but for now, here's why you should be excited to see Jiro in My Hero Academia Season 7. During My Hero Academia's final arc, we've seen countless battles springing up between the heroes and the villains, but one fight I'm sure you were never expecting to see was Kyoka Jiro versus the Demon Lord All For One. As Endeavor and Hawks are trying to fight the main villain and break his mask, All For One gets the upper hand on Endeavor, and the moment that Endeavor goes down, All For One prepares a massive airwave similar to the ones that we saw Shigaraki using in Season 6 to blow Hawks out of the sky so he can do some quirk shopping before he leaves to steal Shigaraki's body. However, at that last moment, his attack is actually blocked by Jiro using her heartbeat wall. And it doesn't stop there, because after taking some attacks from All For One, Jiro sends out a full power sonic attack that not only pushes the villain who fought All Might back, but it breaks his quirk for a moment by causing the vestiges of people he's taken his quirks from to all fight back for the first time, actually causing All for One's mask to break, giving him no life support on the battlefield. Himiko Toga went missing for a while before coming back to the villains. After her battle with Ochako, where she tried to ask Ochako if the hero thought that the villain's life had any value, Toga runs off and accepts that the path that she's on is one where no one will come to save her, not even the two people who she thought could understand her, which are Deku and Ochako. Feeling sorry for herself, she goes back to her childhood home, which has been abandoned by now. And with Toga actually being quite famous now, we see the house is covered in graffiti inside and out that say things like Toga the Terrible, Vampire Demon's Lair, and You'll Pay with Your Lives written on the walls. Toga gets sad, acknowledging how she threw all of this away, and when she leaves the house, she sees Dabi sitting on a nearby building who says, "Who knew you had a heart?" As he sets her entire house ablaze and tells Toga that whether or not you cry or smile, the sun will still come up tomorrow. So from now on, they should smile because that's why they were born, before giving Toga twice his blood. In the real world, when everyone got infected by mice, we called it the bubonic plague. But in My Hero, it seems like everything went another direction because of a little known fact left out of the My Hero Academia anime. All the way back in season 4 during the overhaul arc, Deku battled Kai Chisaki, who looked at quirks and the act of being a hero itself as a kind of disease that he wanted to purge from the world. But in the manga, we get more information on why Kai thinks this, given that Kai actually believes a long-held theory in the world of the series that says that quirks actually come from a sickness spread to humans from mice. This theory has enough backing in the world that not only does the original Destro use a mouse as a logo for the Liberation Army, but it could also have ties to why Principal Nezu was experimented on by humans, given that Nezu himself is a large mouse-like dog creature that has a quirk, and he could really be MHA's own version of Rocket Raccoon, still waiting to have his dark story truly explored. Several students from UA, including Bakugo, are invited to take a class at a special school in Japan for teaching manners, but things go wrong really quickly. First off, we start with Ida and the blonde trio of Bakugo, Kaminari, and Aoyama all making their way to the manners school, with Bakugo somehow not understanding what they want to change about him, and Aoyama saying he's going because he's obsessed with table manners, even though he does look really shady on the color page. When they get to the school after having to do 10 laps around the building randomly, the teachers tell Ida that he's too clean cut and that makes people uncomfortable, forcing Ida to remove his glasses and mess up his hair to give him more of a cool factor, telling him to be more like Bakugo, as Ida begs Bakugo to teach him his menacing look, with Bakugo screaming, "I'm not menacing." This chaos is all because these are actually villains who took over the manners school, and they're not done messing with our UA students just yet. The second user of One For All is the warrior of the group, with him being a leader that led a large force against All For One, trying to keep the Overlord from coming into and staying in power. The second user, paired with the third, successfully pushed All For One back enough that they were able to break into one of his safe houses, which I'm sure was either extremely well guarded or hidden, and they were able to find the first user of One For All inside. The second user's quirk, Gear Shift, allows the user to manipulate the speed of something that they touch, completely ignoring the laws of inertia. This can be done through multiple stages, mimicking a car's manual gear system, and paired with other quirks like Fajin and One For All, it allows the user to completely warp and even break the laws of physics and conserving motion. We know that the second user was killed by All For One, with the villain having tears in his eyes as all of his surroundings look destroyed, and the second user just smiles, knowing he doesn't have the quirk anymore and that it's been given on.